Chapter 1364. The Fengclanzi Bazaar really didn't have anything outstanding. It wasn't on the same level as Jinghua City. However, Xiaohua didn't need any finished products. After buying a lot of low-grade talisman paper and talisman ink, he didn't have anything else to buy. Soon after, he held his hands and slowly strolled around while waiting for 2 hours to pass. What is this? Xiaohua strolled around for a long time. He stood here and squatted there, appearing extremely leisurely. However, when he arrived in front of a small stall, his eyes were immediately attracted by a pitch-black stick that was about a foot long. The stick was thrown to the side of the stall. There were some messy things on the stall that looked very ordinary. Xiaohua wasn't in a hurry to go forward. He only quietly stood at a place with a bit more people. He seemed to be negotiating with others, but his eyes would occasionally glance at the stall. The owner of the stall was a sturdy middle-aged man. He had a square face and rough skin. He didn't look like a cultivator at all. It seemed that the items in the man's stall were not attractive at all. Almost everyone looked around casually and did not stop at all. Even if there were a few people who stopped and looked at the items in the stall, they would leave before they could stand still. As for the middle-aged man, his face was filled with obvious anxiety. From time to time, he would reach out his hand, wanting to greet people, but in the end, not a single word came out of his mouth. After looking for a moment, Xiaohua had an idea in his mind. He slowly walked to the stall of the middle-aged cultivator. Seeing Xiaohua stop in front of his stall, the cultivator's face revealed a happy expression. He rubbed his hands together, looking very excited. However, the cultivator still didn't say anything. He only looked at Xiaohua with a fervent gaze and pointed at his stall with his hand. Xiaohua frowned and thought to himself, "Could it be he's a mute?" He looked for a moment and picked up a palm-sized brown object that he had just seen. He smiled and said, "Fellow Taoist, what is this?" The middle-aged cultivator opened his mouth and his face turned red. He finally said, This is, a lump of black gold is used for refining mid-grade materials. Oh, so it's a stutterer." Xiaohua suddenly realized. No wonder he had to greet him. After the cultivator finished speaking, he let out a long breath and the redness on his face faded a bit. He looked at Xiaohua's calm expression and continued, This thing, if fellow Taoist wants it, please take out three mid-grade spirit stones." The cultivator spoke with great effort, and Xiaohua also listened with great effort. After he finished speaking, Xiaohua pointed at the things next to him and said, "Are these all used for refining? Are they all common prices?" Yes. When the middle-aged cultivator heard this, he nodded his head vigorously. There weren't many cultivators who came to Fengclanzi Bazaar, and those who knew how to refine were even fewer. His materials weren't particularly good, so no one came to him to trade. Now, listening to Xiaohua's tone, it seemed he also didn't know too much. Although he didn't know if Xiaohua really wanted to buy it or not, he was still happy that someone came to take a look. Xiaohua put down the black gold in his hand and picked up another piece. He looked at it while thinking. Looking at this cultivator's rough appearance, he must be a disciple of some small sect that knew how to refine qi. Although he didn't understand these materials for refining, it didn't mean he wouldn't have a use for them in the future. Anyway, he had a lot of spirit stones in his space, so there was no harm in buying some. Thinking, Xiaohua casually asked, "What about this piece? What is it?" This also doesn't know. Presumably because Xiaohua asked something he didn't know, the man's stuttering became even more serious. He only raised his finger and said, "One mid-grade spirit stone." After he finished speaking, he actually wiped the sweat off his forehead with his hand. Xiaohua almost wanted to cover his mouth and laugh, but he still managed to hold himself back. He nodded and said, "Since that's the case, I'll buy some." Good. The middle-aged cultivator was overjoyed. He rubbed his hands and said, I I wonder, which one does fellow Taoist want? These? Xiaohua calculated in his mind, and with a swipe of his hand, he actually managed to swipe the majority of the things on the middle-aged cultivator's stall. This much? The middle-aged cultivator stuttered. Yes. Xiaohua nodded, then casually pointed at the pitch-black stick and casually asked, Is this also used for refining? The middle-aged cultivator squatted down and gathered the materials that Xiaohua had just pulled out. His mouth was wide open as he calculated how many spirit stones these materials were worth. When he heard Xiaohua's words, he looked at the rod that Xiaohua was pointing at and said, No, it's When Xiaohua heard this, his eyes became even brighter. He said with a slightly trembling voice, Can you sell it to I? Sell? No, not selling. The middle-aged cultivator didn't even raise his head and said without hesitation. Xiaohua's heart turned cold. He was about to raise the price when the cultivator said, Fellow Taoist, if you're curious, as long as can take it, I'll gift it to you. The last sentence seemed to have been said with courage, and it was said very quickly. Ha ha! Xiaohua's heart bloomed with joy. He reached out and picked up the black stick. Although the stick was extremely heavy, it didn't seem to be too strenuous in Xiaohua's hands. Fellow Taoist has good strength. The middle-aged cultivator was somewhat flabbergasted. Then I will take it, Xiaohua said without any trace of politeness. Please. The middle-aged cultivator was also quite straightforward. He waved his hand and said, That thing. I don't know what it is. It's in a mountain stream. I picked it up. Fellow Taoist, these materials total 70, 80 middle grade spirit stones. Okay. Xiaohua looked left and right. Seeing that no one was paying attention, he waved his hand and put the black stick into his space. Then he put all the materials on the ground into his storage pouch and said with a smile, Fellow Taoist, where is your storage pouch? I will give you the spirit stones. The middle-aged cultivator hurriedly untied his storage pouch. When Xiaohua put the 78 middle-grade spirit stones into his storage pouch, the stone in his heart finally fell to the ground. He almost couldn't believe that this little cultivator, who was only at the second level of qi refining, could take out so many spirit stones and buy so many refining materials. Fellow Taoist. The middle-aged cultivator looked left and right and said in a low voice, Buy so many materials, or do it a few times. Xiaohua praised in his heart and said with a smile, I will tell you. Many thanks for pointing it out, fellow Taoist. However, I am not alone. There is still a master from my sect here. Oh. The middle-aged cultivator suddenly understood. He immediately nodded and said with a smile, I have thought too much. Soon after, Xiaohua didn't stay any longer. He cupped his hands and left. As he walked, he put the tip of the devil's spear together with the pitch-black stick. Sure enough, the crack at the bottom of the tip of the devil's spear matched the crack of the stick perfectly. I knew it! Just now, this crack looked very familiar. Sure enough, it was like this. Xiaohua was very happy in his heart. It was because of this guess that he went to the stall to buy those refining materials. And after he knew the weight of this stick, he was even more certain that this was definitely a devil tool. It's just that, from the looks of it, this devil tool is still incomplete. The back of the stick is still cut off. Xiaohua looked at the crack at the back of the stick and said thoughtfully, I don't know whose work this is. To actually be able to cut this hard devil tool into several pieces. Even if I managed to use this magic tool, how would I be able to completely restore it? Soon after, Xiaohua looked at the pile of refining materials that he just bought and thought to himself. Could it be that I still need to practice refining? This devil tool is an item of the devil world. The refining methods of the cultivation world might not necessarily work. Besides, why would I restore this devil tool? It's fine as long as there's a spear tip that can be used. Xiaohua immediately came to a realization and thought to himself with a bitter smile. After looking for a while, Xiaohua estimated that it was about time, and walked towards the entrance of the valley. Sure enough, at this time, there weren't many people entering the valley. There was only a young disciple standing there, bored to death, looking all around. Xiaohua saw that the disciplinary Wind Mansion wasn't there, so he didn't walk forward. He walked to a slightly secluded place and took out the communication talisman. Using his magic power, the communication talisman turned into a ray of light and unexpectedly flew into the stone wall to the side. Not long after, he saw the disciplinary Wind Mansion suddenly appear from the corner of the stone wall in the distance. After looking left and right, he walked straight towards Xiaohua. "Fellow Taoist Feng, how is it?" Xiaohua waited for the disciplinary Wind Mansion to come closer and cupped his hands with a smile. I'm afraid it's a bit troublesome," the disciplinary Wind Mansion said with a slight frown. Xiaohua stared blankly, and his heart turned cold. He said in a low voice, "I hope fellow Taoist Feng can explain." The disciplinary Wind Mansion looked left and right and said in a low voice, "Fellow Taoist, please follow I." Xiaohua followed the disciplinary Wind Mansion to the side of the stone wall and said in a low voice, "I won't hide it from fellow Taoist. I know a few loose cultivators. They always have some rare goods. As for the origin of these goods, I naturally won't ask too much. It's not convenient for them to come to my Feng clan's bazaar. Every time, they entrust bazaar to my martial uncle to bring them to sell on consignment. This is because my martial uncle had something to do a few days ago and left this matter to I to handle. As for the medicinal pills fellow Taoists mentioned, they always take out a little bit each time. Therefore, I saw fellow Taoists' eagerness to get medicine and agreed. Could it be there aren't any medicinal pills this time?" Xiaohua asked curiously. It's just outside of fellow Taoists' expectations." The disciplinary Wind Mansion shook his head and said, "It's not that there aren't any this time, it's just that there are too many." "Ah? Too many?" Xiaohua felt a burst of joy. However, he still didn't understand. "Since there are some, why does fellow Taoist say it's troublesome?" The disciplinary Wind Mansion smiled wryly. "It's because their requirements are rather harsh." "That's strange. What's so harsh about it?" "Fellow Taoist, please dispel my confusion." Xiaohua cupped his hands and said, -5. Chapter 1365. Everyone is familiar with Little Dot as the group leader. Harass him more in order to make up for the mistake of being the third flower. This is the second update. Then, I'll be honest with fellow Taoist. Feng Fu sighed and said, "There are 3 types of medicinal pills this time. One is the marrow cleansing pill, one is the Peiyuan pill, and the last is the clear breeze pill. I don't know the specific number. I only know that the most effective Peiyuan pill has the least amount, while the marrow cleansing pill and the clear breeze pill have the most amount. Because the amount of medicinal pills is a bit too many, they made 2 requests." "Which 2? Xiaohua knew that his anxiety was definitely unfavorable to him. However, he still couldn't help but say it. "The first is, if they're going to buy them, then they'll buy them all together. They don't want more people to know about this." Feng Fu looked at Xiaohua and said in a low voice, "But with so many medicinal pills, who can eat them all?" Sure enough, Xiaohua also frowned slightly. It wasn't that he didn't have spirit stones, but the problem was that if he bought them all, wouldn't that be inviting trouble onto himself? "What's the second?" Xiaohua asked again. "The second is even more outrageous. They requested to not trade in my Feng Clan's bazaar. Impossible! Xiao Hua heard and immediately shook his head like a rattledrum. That's right! Feng Fu also said in a low voice. They should be trading in my Feng Clan's bazaar. If they go out, who can guarantee fellow Taoist's safety? They're breaking the rules. Xiao Hua thought for a moment and said in a low voice. Fellow Taoist Feng, I have a question. Why don't they keep these medicinal pills for themselves? From fellow Taoist's words, they have so many medicinal pills and can take some out every time. If they take them for themselves, wouldn't they be able to reach the 10th layer of qi refining? Fellow Taoist, this question is rather strange. Feng Fu looked at Xiao Hua somewhat strangely. Fellow Taoist, could it be that you can't increase your cultivation because your realm isn't high enough? It's true that medicinal pills can increase one's magic power, but if one's cultivation isn't high enough, no matter how many medicinal pills one takes, it still won't increase one's cultivation. I have seen a lot of cultivators like you who want to break through the bottleneck with the help of medicine. You don't have to doubt I. No, fellow Taoist misunderstands. What I mean is that those loose cultivators can use medicinal power to forcefully break through like I did. Xiao Hua hurriedly explained. Fellow Taoist, you're wrong again. How do you know that they haven't tried this before? The disciplinary officer smiled and said, It's precisely because they tried it with fellow Taoists before that they didn't place their hopes on medicinal pills. And then I understand. It's because they have no hope in the medicinal pill aspect that they're unscrupulously searching for other avenues. Xiao Hua silently nodded and also sighed. I don't know if I sigh, let's not talk about it. I'll have to trouble fellow Taoist Feng to tell them that I agree to the first condition and let them state a price. If possible, I will take out the corresponding items or spirit stones. However, the second condition is absolutely out of the question. The disciplinary officer glanced at Xiao Hua thoughtfully and said with a smile, All right, I'll go tell them now. I hope they'll bring good news to fellow Taoist. I'll have to trouble fellow Taoist Feng. Xiao Hua cupped his hands in thanks. After the disciplinary officer left with quick steps, Xiao Hua slightly narrowed his eyes and stared at his back. It was unknown what he was thinking. The disciplinary officer was quite fast. In the time it took to smoke a cigarette, he returned. Behind him was a cultivator wearing camouflage robes. Seeing that the other party was wearing camouflage robes, Xiao Hua's heart stirred and he inwardly said, Could it be, fellow Taoist, I've made you wait for a long time? The disciplinary officer welcomed him with a face full of smiles and said with a smile, Fortunately, I didn't disappoint you. When this senior heard how straightforward fellow Taoist was, he was also moved, so he also took a step back. Xiao Hua nodded and cupped his hands towards the cultivator behind him, saying, Greetings, fellow Taoist. Well said. That cultivator's voice was hoarse and had already been disguised by the camouflage robes. Urgently, that cultivator looked left and right. He took out a silence talisman and used it to block out the surrounding sounds. Then, he said in a low voice, I heard from fellow Taoist Feng that fellow Taoist has the ability to buy all of I's medicinal pills, but I don't believe it. How many spirit stones does fellow Taoist have? Where are fellow Taoist's medicinal pills? And how many spirit stones are they worth? Xiao Hua remained unmoved and asked back. I have 10 Peiyuan pill, 30 marrow cleansing pills, and 50 clear pleasure pills in this storage pouch. That cultivator patted the storage pouch at his waist and said, I won't say too much about the market prices of the Peiyuan pill, marrow cleansing pill, and clear pleasure pill. Peiyuan pill costs 15 mid-grade spirit stones, marrow cleansing pill costs 5 mid-grade spirit stones, and clear pleasure pill costs 3 mid-grade spirit stones. Fellow Taoist has to pay a total of 450 mid-grade spirit stones. Fellow Taoist, this price is indeed expensive, Xiao Hua said with a smile. 3 vitality-absorbing fruits and 3 black tusks can refine 10 Peiyuan pill. 3 vitality-absorbing fruits and 3 black tusks are only 6 mid-grade spirit stones, that's all. Fellow Taoist, this Piyuan pill costs a total of 15 mid-grade spirit stones? Hee, fellow Taoist, how can spiritual plants be compared to medicinal pills? Especially the Piyuan pill that can increase one's power? That cultivator sneered. What I said is the real price. If it wasn't for I having some misgivings, I would have directly put it up for sale in this e.g. Fellow Taoist, don't forget that things like the Piyuan pill have always been auctioned. And that's fine. Xiaohua nodded. He knew. Previously, he bid for a marrow cleansing pill at Jinghua City's e.g. market and spent 10 mid-grade spirit stones. At this time, this rogue cultivator offered a price of 5 mid-grade spirit stones, which really wasn't expensive. Thus, he said with a smile, I already bought it. Why don't you offer a few more spirit stones? Fellow Taoist, you should know that these are all exchanged with my life. If fellow Taoist is one less spirit stone, I definitely won't sell it. That cultivator said very decisively. Fine. Xiaohua thought for a moment, stretched out his hand, and said, I want to see if this medicinal pill is real or fake. To tell the truth, Xiaohua had never seen so many medicinal pills appear in this e.g. market for so long, so he felt a bit uneasy. Fellow Taoist, you still haven't taken out your spirit stones, right? The cultivator didn't hand over his storage pouch. And here they are. Xiaohua took off his storage pouch, but he didn't hand it over to the cultivator. Instead, he handed it over to the discipline hall and said, Fellow Taoist Feng, take a look. Is the amount of spirit stones inside correct? The discipline hall glanced at the cultivator and took Xiaohua's storage pouch. He roughly looked at it and said with a smile, Senior, you should know that this fellow Taoist storage pouch indeed has enough spirit stones. Good. The cultivator heard this and very quickly handed over the storage pouch. Xiaohua patiently inspected it, and found that it was indeed a genuine medicinal pill. He couldn't help but be overjoyed. After changing the contents of the storage pouch, he handed the spirit stones back to the cultivator and said with a smile, Deal. Fellow Taoist, please check the spirit stones. After the cultivator checked, he nodded and said with a smile, I didn't think that I would meet someone as generous as fellow Taoist at the Feng Clan's e.g. market. Nice to meet you. After he finished speaking, he cupped his hands and was about to leave. At this time, Xiaohua's heart suddenly stirred and he hastily yelled, Fellow Taoist, please wait. What? Does fellow Taoist still have something to say? The cultivator turned his head and looked at Xiaohua and the discipline hall in confusion. Xiaohua muttered to himself for a moment and looked at the discipline hall. He also said, This? Fellow Taoist, I have a matter. I don't know if I can ask you directly? What does fellow Taoist want to ask? The cultivator vigilantly asked. It's nothing. Fellow Taoist is overthinking. Xiaohua knew what he was thinking and promptly explained. I want to ask fellow Taoist, do you have any pill recipes or pill refinement methods? Seeing this cultivator take out so many medicinal pills all of a sudden, Xiaohua immediately thought of pill recipes when he thought about what the discipline hall said earlier. This? The cultivator's expression couldn't be seen due to the mist, but his tone was very hesitant. Xiaohua struck while the iron was hot and said, These things don't have any use for fellow Taoist, and they might even attract some trouble. Why don't you transfer them to me? I will give fellow Taoist a satisfactory price. When the discipline hall beside them heard this, he was also slightly stunned. He opened his mouth but didn't say anything. The cultivator pondered for a moment and said with a smile, Fellow Taoist, you really have a big tone. Pill recipes above e.g. are hard to find. One pill recipe costs more than 500 high-grade spirit stones, yet fellow Taoist actually, Then, the cultivator turned his head and said to the discipline hall, I want to speak with this fellow Taoist alone. I ask fellow Taoist Feng to leave for a moment. This? All right. The discipline hall smiled wryly and turned to leave. After the discipline hall left, the cultivator took out several books from his sleeve and held them in his hand. He said, I won't hide it from fellow Taoist. I indeed obtained 5 pill recipes. However, I'm not proficient in alchemy, and I don't understand the things inside. If fellow Taoist sincerely wants them, each of these 5 pill recipes will cost 800 high-grade spirit stones, for a total of 4 supreme-grade spirit stones. I want to take a look first. Xiao Hua's heart was beating wildly, and he felt somewhat thirsty. No! The cultivator shook his head and said, once you see these pill recipes, perhaps fellow Taoists will know where they came from. If fellow Taoist doesn't want them, what will happen to I? I can't take this risk. If fellow Taoist believes in I, then hurry up and give me the spirit stones. Xiao Hua looked at his face, which couldn't be seen clearly under the mist. He clenched his teeth and said, all right, I believe you. As he said this, he handed over the storage pouch in his sleeve. Fellow Taoist, is there a mistake? This storage pouch is empty. The cultivator looked at the empty storage pouch and felt very strange. Xiao Hua's expression gradually calmed down, and he said with a smile, fellow Taoist, take a look at this storage pouch. It was specially made by the 7 Skills sect, and it costs 10 supreme-grade spirit stones. I didn't bring that many supreme-grade spirit stones. If fellow Taoist thinks it's suitable, I can exchange this storage pouch for the pill recipes. Fellow Taoist's storage pouch is really quite a lot. The cultivator glanced at the storage pouch on Xiao Hua's waist, then carefully inspected the storage pouch in his hand. Seeing the cultivator inspecting it, Xiao Hua couldn't help but feel his heart beating faster. This was the storage pouch he got from the spirit husbandry sect disciple. The space inside was much larger than Yongshang's and was about the same as the one he extorted from the market. Since that one could be exchanged for a few supreme-grade spirit stones, then this one could also be exchanged. Sure enough, the cultivator looked at it and nodded. Fellow Taoist's storage pouch is much better than I's. It should be worth a few supreme-grade spirit stones. Then, fellow Taoist, are you willing to exchange? Xiao Hua's heart couldn't help but beat faster. -5. Chapter 1366. Everyone is familiar with Xiao Dian as the group leader. Please harass him in order to make up for the mistake of being the third flower. This is the third update. That cultivator still used his hoarse voice to say, why not? I happen to be lacking such a big storage pouch. However, the 7 Possibilities sect is as shady as the Phone clan. One storage pouch costs 10 top-grade spirit stones. I really don't want to part with it. Since fellow Taoists gave me your storage pouch today, it means that we are fated to meet. Why not trade? The cultivator put away the storage pouch in his sleeve and handed over the 5 small booklets. Xiao Hua took them and resisted the urge to open them and put them into his storage pouch. All right, fellow Taoist, I's harvest today is quite bountiful, far surpassing my expectations. Farewell. That cultivator cupped his hands and smiled. Moreover, I didn't expect that fellow Taoist, with your mid-stage second-layer qi refining cultivation, would actually, tisk. That cultivator didn't finish his sentence and left. What's the meaning of this? Xiao Hua was slightly surprised. This time, he had thrown caution to the wind and wanted to take the risk to get the pill recipes. It wasn't that he hadn't thought of the risks involved. The 7 Possibilities sect is as shady as the Phone clan? Just now, Xiao Hua was immersed in the joy of obtaining the pill recipes. Now that he thought about it, he immediately woke up. Of course, the Discipline Hall was a disciple of the Phone clan. It wasn't a big deal for him to buy the Peiyuan pill, but the pill recipes, those were things that even cultivation sects coveted. How could a small cultivation clan not covet them? As for why that cultivator didn't sell the pill recipes to the Phone clan, it might be because he had just obtained them recently, and hadn't met any martial uncle from the Discipline Hall. Or maybe the Phone clan knew that the origin of this cultivator's pill recipes was unknown, and wasn't willing to pay a high price. If the Phone clan didn't know that the pill recipes were given to him, then it would be fine. But since they knew, how could they let it go? The Discipline Hall was also a disciple of the Phone clan. They wouldn't turn their elbows to him. When he thought up to here, Xiaohua couldn't help but feel regret for his rash actions. But, if he hadn't taken the risk, would he have been able to obtain these pill formulas? Xiaohua understood and immediately walked towards the entrance of the valley. At this time, there was still more than an hour before the appointed time with Li Xiaowen. However, when Xiaohua came to the entrance of the valley, he was overjoyed. The 4 people were standing there and chatting. Thinking about it, these people were all strolling around Jinghua City's e.g. How could they care about the Feng clan's e.g.? After restocking up on materials and yellow talismans, they lost their desire to wander around and returned to the entrance of the valley. Seeing that Xiaohua had unexpectedly returned ahead of time, Li Xiaowen smiled and said, "Fellow Taoist Xiao, you're the last one to return. Did you gain anything?" "Hee, it's alright. I bought some fireball talismans, but they aren't as good as the ones I bought before." Xiaohua smiled and said, "Since all the fellow Taoists are here, let's leave in advance. It's not appropriate to stay here for too long." As Xiaohua spoke, his eyes slightly glanced at the Feng clan disciple standing not far away. That Feng clan disciple clearly didn't pay attention to them. At this time, many cultivators had already left the valley. Xiaohua's group wasn't the first group. Everyone nodded and stepped out of the valley. After the time it took to brew a cup of tea after Xiaohua's group left, 2 cultivators around the 6th layer of qi refining hurriedly walked out from a corner of the valley. Behind them was the pale-faced discipline hall disciple. When the 2 arrived at the entrance of the valley, they immediately questioned the disciple on duty. That disciple was very surprised. After listening, he easily recalled the tall Xiaohua. When they heard that Xiaohua's group had just left, the 2 of them fiercely glared at the discipline hall disciple and chased after them from inside the valley. The discipline hall disciple's face was filled with panic. He didn't forget to fiercely glare at the disciple on duty and hurriedly chased after them. On the contrary, the disciple who was innocently glared at had a puzzled expression. He strangely looked at the discipline hall disciple's back and helplessly shrugged. When Xiaohua's group left the valley, there were also Feng clan disciples on duty outside. However, they didn't stop them from leaving. If Xiaohua was alone, he would definitely want to cover it up and definitely wouldn't directly fly towards the Yulian Mountains. However, Li Xiaowen's group didn't know this and directly flew towards the direction. Xiaohua couldn't explain it clearly, and could only follow behind them. Li Xiaowen's group didn't fly very fast, and even seemed to be somewhat leisurely. Xiaohua was impatient as he watched from behind. He unconsciously increased his speed and caught up to Li Xiaowen. He said, "Fellow Taoist Li, we don't have much time left. Can you fly a bit faster?" "Fly a bit faster?" Li Xiaowen stared blankly for a moment before coming to a realization. He glanced at Xiaohua and said, "Fellow Taoist Xiao, I know your cultivation has advanced by leaps and bounds. You're already in the middle of the 2nd layer of qi refining. In addition, your flying speed should be quite a bit faster. However, the Yulian Mountains ahead is a place even more dangerous than the southern colored plains. If we don't conserve our energy, how can we safely pass through it?" These words immediately pushed Xiaohua back. It was as if Xiaohua was urging everyone to fly because he wanted to show off. "Fellow Taoist Li, it's like this." Xiaohua thought for a moment, and still felt that he should roughly explain this situation. However, at this moment, a sneer came from behind him. "Fellow Taoist in front, could you please wait? This is bad." When Xiaohua heard this, his heart skipped a beat. He turned around and sure enough, there were 2 cultivators wearing clothes similar to the ones from the discipline hall. "Fellow Taoists, what's the matter?" When Li Xiaowen's group saw the Feng clan disciples, their hearts trembled and they became vigilant. Li Xiaowen stopped and cupped his hands. "What's the matter?" A slightly taller and plump Feng clan disciple glanced at Xiaohua and turned his head to ask, "Did you just come from the Feng clan's trade fair?" "That's right." "What business does fellow Taoist have with us?" Li Xiaowen asked again. "This fellow Taoist, what's his relationship with you fellow Taoists?" The other thin disciple pointed at Xiaohua and asked straightforwardly. Li Xiaowen slightly frowned and cupped his hands. This is fellow Taoist Xiao, who has been forsaken by the heavens. What business does fellow Taoist have with us? Forsaken by the heavens? The disciple from before also frowned, inwardly regretting. If I knew it was forsaken by the heavens, I wouldn't have come with just 2 people. If a few more people came, we could have caught all of these loose cultivators in one fell swoop. But now, it's a bit difficult. Soon after, this disciple slightly leaned to the side, wanting to see if the discipline hall disciples chasing after them had caught up. If it was just the 3 of them, they should still have some assurance. Li Xiaowen and the others were loose cultivators, so how could they not know the dangers involved? Seeing the 6th level Qi condensation disciple of the Feng clan catch up without even explaining the reason, Li Xiaowen sneered and said, "My heaven-forsaken members shouldn't cause trouble, but we're also not afraid of trouble. Fellow Taoist, what business do you have with us? If there's nothing urgent, I and the others still have to hurry on. Farewell." As he spoke, he flung his sleeve and was about to leave. Wait. The slightly fat disciple of the Feng clan became anxious. He pointed at Xiaohua and said, "You can leave, but he can't." "Fellow Taoist, why can't I leave?" Xiaohua sneered. Because you stole something from my Feng clan." The slightly fat disciple's eyes turned and he hurriedly said, "Ha ha." Xiaohua laughed loudly and said, "I only stayed in the valley of Yi for 2 hours. How could I steal something from your Feng clan? Fellow Taoist, you're really slandering me. Hee, whether you stole or not, you know clearly in your heart. We're too lazy to argue with you. You only need to follow us back to Feng Station. Naturally, my Feng clan's ancestor will deal with you." The slightly thin disciple went with the flow and said, "Even if you're a disciple of one of the 3 great cultivation sects in our country of Shi, you should still come to my Feng clan to explain. Not to mention that you're a member of Heaven Forsaken. If my Feng clan made a mistake, we should give Heaven Forsaken an explanation." At this time, Li Xiaowen also seemed to have thought of Xiaohua's abnormal behavior just now. He whispered, "Fellow Taoist Xiao, what's going on? Did you take something from the Feng clan or not?" Xiaohua glanced at Li Xiaowen and said with a smile, "I only stayed in Yi for 2 hours with fellow Taoist. Does fellow Taoist think that I have the ability to steal something from the Feng clan? Fellow Taoists, I'm afraid you've misunderstood?" Li Xiaowen cupped his hands and said, "This fellow Taoist has a shallow cultivation. How could he take something from the Feng clan? Could it be that only people with high cultivation can steal things? It's precisely this kind of shallow rogue cultivator that likes to take other people's things the most. Then, fellow Taoist, what did fellow Taoist Xiao take from the Feng clan?" Li Xiaowen asked curiously. It's not convenient for I to tell fellow Taoist. I ask fellow Taoist Xiao to return with I. If fellow Taoists are not at ease, you can also follow along. What if I don't return with you? Xiaohua sneered. Don't return? That's not up to you. The slightly shorter disciple sneered. Then he glanced back again. Seeing this, Li Xiaowen's heart trembled. He already felt that the situation was critical. He hurriedly said, "Fellow Taoist Xiao, if you took other people's things, it's better to return them as soon as possible. Just now, I already said that I, Heaven Forsaken, am not afraid of causing trouble, but I also never take the initiative to cause trouble. If fellow Taoist makes any mistakes, I, Heaven Forsaken, will not protect you. Fellow Taoist Li, do you believe I? Or do you believe the Feng clan?" Xiaohua asked coldly. "I, naturally believe the truth," Li Xiaowen said anxiously. "If fellow Taoist Xiao took it, then quickly take it out and give it to them. Apologize and compensate them a bit. They might not let fellow Taoist Xiao go. Moreover, fellow Taoist Xiao, do you think our matters are more important, or that you took other people's things?" Just as he said this, the people from the discipline hall caught up from afar. Their shadows could already be seen. The slightly fatter disciple had been paying attention all along. Now that he saw them, he sneered and said, "Since that's the case, then, come to my Feng clan as guests." After saying this, the two of them glanced at each other. Then, they quickly surrounded the 5 people from the left and right. Not good, let's go. Seeing this, Li Xiaowen and the others were greatly alarmed. They urged the magic power they had long since stored up, and their figures swiftly flew in different directions like lightning. Only Xiaohua was not in a hurry. He looked for a direction where no one was going and flew over at a leisurely pace. -5. Chapter 1367. Seeing this, the 2 disciples of the Feng family were overjoyed. They both abandoned the others and chased after Xiaohua. Their target was Xiaohua. Even if Li Xiaowen and the others ran away, they wouldn't care too much. Not to mention capturing Xiaohua, it would be easy to label him as a thief. Even if they killed Xiaohua, would their Feng family be afraid of the heavens? You brat, why haven't you surrendered yet? The 2 disciples chased while shouting proudly. But after chasing for a while, the 2 felt that something was wrong. Xiaohua was only at the 2nd level of qi refining. How could he fly faster than them? The 2 had already pushed their magic power to the maximum, but there was still a certain distance between them and Xiaohua. They couldn't get close. Could it be? The 2 disciples looked at each other and saw the astonishment on each other's faces. Seeing this, Xiaohua knew that he had found an opportunity. He immediately stopped flying, turned around, and quickly flew towards the 2. His speed was actually much faster than before. This is bad, we've been tricked! The 2 disciples were shocked, but at the same time, they were bewildered. They couldn't figure out how they were tricked by this 2nd-level qi refining cultivator. Around them, there clearly wasn't anyone lying in ambush. Just as the 2 were hesitating, they took out yellow talismans from their storage pouches and wanted to use their magic power. They heard Xiaohua sneer. I'll let you see this young master's power! As soon as his voice fell, the 2 saw Xiaohua's hands shoot out in succession. In a short moment, a large expanse of gradually enlarging fireballs came down from above their heads and all around them. Fireball talisman? Seeing Xiaohua's fireball talisman, the 2 let out a sigh of relief and sneered in their hearts. This kind of low-level fireball talisman, no matter how many there were, wouldn't pose a real threat to a 6th-level qi refining cultivator. As such, the 2 of them didn't care too much about it. They slapped their storage pouches and took out several water curtain talismans. With a flash of magic power, several extremely thick water curtains appeared above the 2 of them, blocking the fireball talismans from below. However, something unforgettable happened. Just as the water curtain was formed, the fireball at the front hit the water curtain. With a loud bang, the fireball immediately blasted a large hole in the water curtain created by the middle-grade water curtain talisman. Immediately after, there was a series of rumbling sounds. Just as the water curtain was about to collapse, a few more fireball talismans exploded. These exploding fireball talismans actually caused the entire water curtain to disappear without a trace. Supreme-grade fireball talisman? Both of their eyes were filled with confusion. How can a rogue cultivator have so many of them? However, the 2 of them immediately realized that this guy in front of them was the one who had bought the pill formulas. How could he be lacking in spirit stones? In the instant after the numerous water curtains were destroyed, the numerous fireballs began to close in on them. They frequently exploded around the 2 of them. Intense explosions, scorching air currents, and the fireballs that did not reach their bodies forced the 2 of them into a fluster. They did not know how to deal with the situation. Flames also splashed in all directions, making it impossible for them to clearly see the situation around them. With a loud bang, an enormous fireball exploded above the 2 of them. All of a sudden, the 2 of them's hair was blown away. The flames spread in all directions, and even their Taoist robes were about to ignite. Fortunately, the 2 of them had already placed Vajra talismans on their bodies, so they were not injured. However, even so, the enormous heatwave still caused the 2 of them to tumble a few times, and they directly fell down from midair. Hee, this guy is really a rogue cultivator. He only knows how to throw fireballs above our heads and in all directions. He doesn't know how to set up defenses below us. If he could also throw a few fireball talismans here, wouldn't we have to bear the consequences? The slightly shorter disciple stabilized his body, and smiled as he spoke to the slightly taller disciple. The slightly taller disciple raised his eyebrows. Without waiting for him to speak, his expression immediately changed, and he urgently said, "Junior brother, be careful!" "Be careful?" That cultivator immediately looked left and right, but did not discover the slightest abnormality. When he saw that his senior brother's gaze was looking downwards, he was startled in his heart, and promptly lowered his head. Sure enough, just a foot below him, Xiaohua was holding a spear in his hand, and was rapidly thrusting towards the sole of his foot. "Impudent!" That cultivator loudly roared, and an icicle talisman was casually created, thrusting towards the top of Xiaohua's head. This icicle talisman was much larger than the one Xiaohua used before. Moreover, as the icicle talisman flew through the air, it faintly emitted a zhi sound, which was a sign of vigorous magic power activation. As expected of a 6th-level qi refining cultivator. The strength of this magic power, the control of this magic power, and the use of yellow talismans are all far beyond what I can compare to. I'm afraid that my iron cloak talisman will be destroyed by this low-level icicle talisman. Xiaohua saw that the icicle talisman was casually thrusted towards him like a real icicle talisman, and he secretly praised in his heart. Sure enough, the icicle talisman used by a 6th-level qi refining cultivator was several times more powerful than Xiaohua's own icicle talisman. Xiaohua's iron cloak talisman was only able to resist for a moment, and after a flash of brilliance, it was destroyed by the icicle talisman. Xiaohua tilted his head, and with a poo sound, the icicle talisman pierced Xiaohua's shoulder. However, even though Xiaohua was pierced by the icicle talisman, he didn't stop in the slightest. At the same time, the devil's spear in his hand pierced that cultivator's leg. Although that cultivator also had a Vajra talisman on his body, which was newly formed after being destroyed by the fireball talisman, when the devil's spear pierced through, the Vajra talisman's brilliance actually faintly flashed, and the devil's spear pierced a bull-sized hole in it. Afterwards, the devil's spear didn't stop in the slightest, and at almost the same instant that the icicle talisman pierced Xiaohua's shoulder, the devil's spear also pierced that cultivator's leg. Ouch! The sharp pain transmitted from his leg made that cultivator faintly cry out, but his cry didn't spread for long before that cultivator's body immediately fell from midair, like a piece of stone. All of this happened in the time it took for a spark to fly off a piece of flint. The other cultivator only had time to shout, "Junior martial brother!" before everything was over. Xiaohua immediately turned around, and only a few strands of blood flowed out from his shoulder. Xiaohua was too lazy to pay attention to it, and with a wave of his devil's spear, he once again rushed towards that cultivator. Seeing Xiaohua rush over, that cultivator's heart trembled for no reason, and a trace of fear actually appeared on his face. It was as if Xiaohua was a 6th-layer qi refining cultivator, and he himself was only a 2nd-layer qi refining cultivator. "Hand over your life!" Xiaohua shouted as he rushed closer. That cultivator anxiously waved his hand, and similarly, a pile of fireball talismans was thrown out, wanting to block in front of Xiaohua. "Ha ha ha! You actually dare to play with fire in front of this young master!" Xiaohua sneered, and with a wave of his hand, he also threw out a pile of fireball talismans. At the same time that the fireball talismans were thrown out, Xiaohua's eyes lit up, as if he had thought of something. The corners of his mouth faintly rose, and with another stretch of his hand, he also took out a dozen or so confinement talismans. With a wave of his hand, he activated them with magic power, and scattered them into the rumbling fireballs. The fireballs exploded one by one. Not only did the flowing fire scatter, but even the confinement talismans that had been activated were thrown into disarray by the qi waves, and rapidly flew in all directions without any pattern. If it was a normal confinement talisman, this 6th-layer qi refining cultivator would have many ways to avoid it. However, under the influence of the qi waves from many different directions, the confinement talismans that Xiaohua had just scattered suddenly appeared near the cultivator. That cultivator did his best to avoid them, but in the end, he still couldn't escape. One of the confinement talismans hidden in the fireball talismans was stuck directly in front of his chest. With a whoosh, this cultivator, like his junior martial brother, rapidly fell down. Xiaohua also dodged a confinement talisman that had exploded in front of him, and quickly chased after this cultivator with the devil's spear in hand. This cultivator was hit by the confinement talisman, and his body was tightly bound. No matter how he struggled, he couldn't break free in the slightest. He could only watch helplessly as Xiaohua flew closer and extended the devil's spear, easily piercing his chest. "Martial uncles, martial uncles!" The voice of the pursuing cultivator from the discipline hall echoed in the air. In his eyes, for 2 6th-layer chi refining martial uncles to catch a 2nd-layer chi refining brat like Xiaohua was as easy as lifting a hand. That's why he wasn't worried in the slightest as he headed towards this area where sparks were flying. However, before he could clearly see the situation, a gust of wind came from behind him. He only had enough time to turn his head, and all he saw was a black spear tip that suddenly enlarged in front of his eyes. Soon after, he felt pain on his face, and he lost consciousness. That spear tip was the only thing the cultivator from the discipline hall saw before he died. As for the owner of the spear tip, even the dead cultivator from the discipline hall absolutely didn't believe it was Xiaohua. Xiaohua withdrew the spear tip and coldly looked at the corpses of the cultivator from the discipline hall. He didn't have any pity in his heart. Soon after, he flew to the ground and took the storage pouches of the 3 cultivators. He threw everything into the space and stuffed the empty storage pouches into his sleeves. Finally, he used a fireball talisman to destroy the 3 corpses. Only then did he fly into the air, find the possible direction of Li Xiaowen and the others, and chase after them. Compared to Xiaohua, Li Xiaowen, Fan Daomao, Fu Shu, and Sun Fian were even more shameful. When they saw the Feng clan's disciples surround them from both sides, they immediately flew away. Moreover, they very tacitly flew in all directions and didn't gather in one place. At this time, how could they still have Tianqi's style of facing a common enemy? When they flew far away like stray dogs, they finally realized that the target of the Feng clan's people was Xiaohua. They didn't seem to put Tianqi in their eyes and didn't care about Tianqi's so-called revenge. They didn't have any intention of silencing all of them. And it was just that they didn't have any absolute intention of doing so. Soon after, several people gathered in the direction of Yulian Mountains and gathered together at the foot of a towering mountain. "Alas, fellow Taoist Li, our luck isn't good," Fan Daomao sighed and said. "When I saw fellow Taoist Ma send Xiaohua to our group that day outside of Jinghua City, I felt that something was wrong. Sure enough, you see, what kind of trouble did he cause? Even going to the Feng clan's EG could attract the Feng clan's disciples. You said that you bought something good and quietly took it away. Why did it have to be seen by the Feng clan? However, this poor Taoist is quite curious, Xiaohua. What kind of treasure did he get that actually made the Feng clan disregard their face and not afraid of spreading the news of EG to the cultivation world?" Sun Fian said thoughtfully. -5. Chapter 1368. Only he himself knows what benefits he obtained. In any case, he won't have the chance to speak again in the future. If fellow Taoist wants to know, you should go ask the Feng clan, Li Xiaowen coldly said. I feel that fellow Taoist Xiao is very loyal. Just now, he didn't explain the matter clearly. Otherwise, you and I wouldn't be standing here so calmly. Yes, fellow Taoist Li is right, Fu Shu bitterly said. Fellow Taoist Xiao is a person with great luck. He was able to calmly escape from the southern color plane and even found Yongshang's corpse. Even in the small Feng clan Z bazaar, he was able to find good things that could make the Feng clan fall out with him. If he could escape today's calamity, we might be able to obtain the treasures and cultivation methods for this heaven's forsaken mission if we were together with him. Bullshit! Sun Fian didn't speak, but once he did, he spoke with a foul mouth. If this guy is dead, then he's dead. Why didn't he give us the 2 silk bags in his storage bag? Yongshang died and only took one, but he took 2 in a row. Without 2 silk bags, where would we go to search for treasures? It would be better to just pat our butts and go back to our own homes. Sigh, we can't blame fellow Taoist Xiao. Just now, the Feng clan was too strict. If fellow Taoist Xiao had some free time, he would have given us the silk bags first. Li Xiaowen thought of Xiaohua's abnormality at the beginning, and what Xiaohua wanted to say to him. His heart was filled with regret. Presumably, Xiaohua wanted to give him the silk bags at that time. Right now, it's useless to say more. Let's think about how to deal with it. As Fu Shu spoke, he suddenly frowned and looked towards a direction. He curiously said, "Fellow Taoists over there, there seems to be thunder. Did you hear it?" "Eh? Yes, it's true. Although the sound is very soft, it's continuous." Li Xiaowen and the others also curiously looked towards that direction. "Oh? There's no sound." In a flash, Sun Fian said, "Maybe our fellow Taoist Xiao is stubbornly resisting. The fireball talisman he accidentally bought from the E-Bazaar is showing its might. Hee, but what's the use of it? How can a 2nd-level Qi refining kid be a match for a 6th-level Qi refinement cultivator? Even we can't avoid it. Won't he be captured obediently? I'm afraid we can't return to Feng Station. The Feng clan wants to take something important from Xiaohua. If we go back, we'll be walking right into their trap." Li Xiaowen ignored Sun Fian's cold words and said in a low voice, "Perhaps should we look for some old friends who are familiar with the Feng clan? We only want the 2 silk bags in Xiaohua's storage pouch. Everything else will be given to the Feng clan. Moreover, we'll just treat it as if Xiaohua died in the southern color plains." Sun Fian asked for a snub and said again, "It's possible, but won't the heavenly Forsaken be implicated in the matter of the spinneret? This operation is very secretive." Li Xiaowen frowned. Everyone looked at each other and talked for the time it took to brew a cup of tea, but they still couldn't come up with a good idea. Just as everyone was frowning, a figure flew over their heads at an extremely fast speed and headed straight for the Yulian Mountains. "Eh? An 11th level Qi refinement senior?" Fu Shu was the first to notice, and hurriedly pointed with his finger. "Look at his flying speed." Sun Fian's eyes were somewhat envious. "Oh no, this is Xiao. Fellow Taoist Xiao's figure." Li Xiaowen looked at the back of the figure that he suspected to be an 11th level Qi refinement cultivator, and suddenly stammered. The degree of stammering really caught up with the Feng clan's Xiaohua. "Isn't that? That's fellow Taoist Zhao's Taoist robe!" Fan Daomao also exclaimed. "Quickly stop him!" Sun Fian immediately shouted. But just as they hesitated and flew into the air again, Xiaohua had already flown far away. With their flying speed, how could they catch up? "Quick, consecutive note talisman!" Li Xiaowen suddenly thought. He slapped his storage pouch and took out the consecutive note talisman. Urging his magic power, the consecutive note talisman quickly flew in the direction of Xiaohua. "It really is fellow Taoist Xiao?" Sun Fian only now truly believed it. "Let's go, we'll welcome him." The expression on Li Xiaowen's face was somewhat strange. It really wasn't easy to express with words, and the others were the same. Sure enough, in no more than a moment, Xiaohua's thin and tall figure appeared in everyone's field of vision. However, as everyone expected, his flying speed was already extremely slow, about the same as their flying speed. Seeing Xiaohua turn around, Li Xiaowen hurriedly stepped forward and opened his mouth. It was unknown what he wanted to say, but he rolled his eyes and laughed. "Fellow Taoist Xiao, I and the others have been waiting here for a long time. I've troubled fellow Taoists to wait for so long, I'm truly ashamed." Xiaohua's expression didn't change as he also cupped his hands and said, "That? Fellow Taoist Xiao? Feng clan?" Sun Fian actually didn't want to ask, but he really couldn't help it. He couldn't imagine that just a moment ago, Xiaohua was still an insignificant little cultivator, but in the blink of an eye, he became so mysterious. He actually flew so fast, and actually escaped from the hands of 2 6th-level Qi condensation cultivators. Moreover, looking at Xiaohua's leisurely appearance and the sound just now, those 2 cultivators, no, 3 cultivators, perhaps, all pointed to disaster? However, the Xiaohua in front of him just happened to be at the 2nd level of Qi condensation, and he simply didn't conceal it in the slightest. Could it be that this guy is the senior who hides his strength? At the same time he asked, such a thought suddenly popped into Sun Fian's mind. But when he thought of Xiaohua's knowledge and experience that were very consistent with his cultivation, Sun Fian inwardly denied it. Oh, Feng clan! Xiaohua smiled very meaningfully. After everyone left first, I reasoned with them, laid out the facts, and explained the whole sequence of events in full detail. They were aware that they were too impulsive and knew that they had wrongly accused I. After repeatedly bowing and apologizing to I, they returned. Huh! Li Xiaowen and the others heard this, and their faces were all strange. Oh right, the Feng clan's disciples also told I to tell fellow Taoists that they have disturbed everyone. They are very sorry. If you have the opportunity to come to Feng Station next time, they would like to invite fellow Taoists to Feng clan for a chat. They will do their best to entertain you. Xiaohua's words were very colorful, and his eyes contained a smiling expression. The 4 people didn't know whether to laugh or cry, and didn't know how to respond. Fellow Taoist Xiao is indeed an expert, who convinces people with reason. After a long while, Li Xiaowen muttered. Amen, indeed, I really am an expert who convinces people with force. Xiaohua grinned, showing his snow-white teeth. Okay, since fellow Taoist Xiao has returned, we have nothing to worry about. Fu Shu's bitter face finally had a trace of a smile. I feel guilty, I should have given the silk bag to fellow Taoist Li, but, hee. Xiaohua smiled. No need, that silk bag is very safe with fellow Taoist Xiao, I can rest assured. Li Xiaowen quickly waved his hand and said. Then what are we waiting for? Let's quickly go to Yulian Mountain? Xiaohua smiled and said. Yes, let's go quickly. Li Xiaowen and the others suddenly realized that this was still the Feng clan's territory. Although Xiaohua said that he convinced people with reason and that the Feng clan would no longer pursue this matter, who would be so brainless to believe it? If they didn't hurry now, when the Feng clan caught up, Xiaohua could escape, but what about them? However, just as this thought arose in everyone's eyes, they immediately thought that since Xiaohua's flying speed was so fast, then when he encountered the Feng clan disciples, he should have been able to escape. However, he didn't fly away and led the Feng clan disciples to another place. Then, what did Xiaohua do? Everyone didn't think that Xiaohua abandoned his own safety for the sake of being abandoned by the heavens. Immediately, they tensed up their guesses, and a trace of cold sweat quietly appeared on their backs. On the road again, Xiaohua's speed was still about the same as theirs, but Li Xiaowen and the others didn't dare to leave Xiaohua behind, and rather respectfully invited Xiaohua to fly at the front. Seeing this scene, Xiaohua knew that his matter had been somewhat exposed, but his current state of mind was already somewhat different from a month ago. First, in the past, he had only stayed at Yellow Flower Ridge, then came to Jinghua City. Of course, when he was at Yellow Flower Ridge, he also went to Medicine Farmer Peak, which caused Xiaohua's vision to be narrow. Although Zhang Qixiao previously said how big the Xiaoyu continent was, Xiaohua didn't have a direct impression. Therefore, he previously tried his best to conceal himself, wanting to avoid the 100 Herbs clan's pursuit. However, during this period of time in Jinghua City, and from the time he left Jinghua City until today, he truly experienced the vastness of the Xiaoyu continent. Moreover, this was only the country of Xi, a mere rogue cultivator organization, heaven-forsaken's operation, yet he ran for so long and encountered so many things. The key point was that after doing so many things, he wasn't recognized by the 100 Herbs clan disciples at all. Outside of Yi City, he hadn't even seen a 100 Herbs clan disciple. Since he couldn't meet a 100 Herbs clan disciple, what was he afraid of? Who knew who Xiaohua was? Secondly, Xiaohua successively obtained talisman crafting methods, pill recipes, and the recently obtained pill concoction method. These were things that even cultivator aristocratic families coveted. With these things, Xiaohua wasn't afraid that he wouldn't have a direction in his cultivation, nor was he afraid that he wouldn't be able to exchange these things for cultivation techniques. Thirdly, Xiaohua obtained a large pile of Peiyuan pill, Spirit Awakening pill, and Clear Ripple pill that could increase his power. Relying on these pills, he could easily raise his cultivation to the third layer of qi refining. If Heaven Forsaken's operation this time went smoothly, he would be able to obtain some benefits from it. Even if there weren't any benefits, as long as he stayed in Heaven's Forsaken for a while, he would be able to get his hands on some third-layer aura refining cultivation method and some medicinal pills. Then, reaching the fourth and fifth layers of aura refining wouldn't be impossible. In the end, what made Xiaohua the most confident was that, relying on his speed, the heavy spear tip, and his immense strength, even a sixth-layer qi refining cultivator was easily killed by him. Once his cultivation reached the fourth or fifth layer, perhaps even a 10th-layer qi refining cultivator would be no match for him. Then, why would he be afraid of being hunted down by the 100 Herbs sect? -5. Chapter 1369. After Xiaohua figured it out, he immediately felt that this Dawn Rain continent was vast and that he could go anywhere he wanted. For a moment, he was filled with lofty sentiments. His flying speed slowly increased, almost as if he wanted to leave everyone behind. Li Xiaowen and the others chased closely behind, urging their magic power to barely keep up. When the magic power in their bodies was almost exhausted, Xiaohua was still leading the way as if nothing had happened. Li Xiaowen and the others unconsciously looked at each other in dismay, exclaiming from the bottom of their hearts. This? Is he really at the second level of qi refinement? Fellow Taoist Xiao! Fellow Taoist Xiao! Li Xiaowen shouted loudly, not lacking a trace of respect. Oh? Fellow Taoist Li! Why did you call me? When Xiaohua heard the call, he slowed down and asked curiously. But when he turned around and saw everyone chasing after him, he immediately came to his senses and cupped his hands. Fellow Taoist, this poor Taoist, was thinking about something, but... I was rude! Cough cough, fellow Taoist Xiao leading the way isn't bad. Li Xiaowen caught up, his face somewhat strange. But fellow Taoist, your direction is wrong. The more you walk, the further you go. Hee. Xiaohua laughed embarrassedly, saying with extreme embarrassment. Then I'll ask fellow Taoist Li to lead the way. I'll still be at the back. Everyone was unwilling, still wanting Xiaohua to fly in the middle. How could Xiaohua be long-winded with them? He said somewhat impatiently. I's cultivation is the most shallow. I still want to comprehend cultivation at the back. Seniors, please lead the way. You're still calling your cultivation shallow? 2 6th-level qi refinement experts are in your hands, their fates unknown. Everyone cursed in their hearts, but they also didn't dare to force Xiaohua. They could only do the same as before, letting Xiaohua follow behind. Everyone's order was the same as before, but the situation was as different as heaven and earth. With someone leading the way in front, Xiaohua's heart felt a lot more at ease. He just casually flew at the back, free and unfettered as before. Sun Fian and the others occasionally turned their heads, but Xiaohua simply ignored them. He knew that these loose cultivators all put their own interests above everything else. Even if he took a few pieces of top-grade spirit stones from them, they might not necessarily take this sentiment to heart. Humph, if I had known this would happen, I would have taken those spirit stones a few days ago. Xiaohua was somewhat regretful in his heart. After flying for a while, Xiaohua took out the 5 pill recipes from his sleeve and looked at them one by one. Xiaohua's heart almost jumped out of his chest. It was no wonder that the Feng clan wanted to do such a despicable thing, and it was no wonder that the rogue cultivator wanted to quickly get rid of them. These 5 books. Not only were there pill recipes, there were also 2 books related to alchemy techniques. Because he was in the air, Xiaohua didn't look at them in detail. However, based on a cursory glance, Xiaohua knew that these 5 books must belong to some alchemist. As long as he could comprehend these 5 books and obtain the pill furnace, he would definitely be able to refine pills. I don't know which sex alchemist was killed by that bastard, Xiaohua sneered. If someone were to find out, they would definitely come out to hunt him down. No wonder he wanted to get rid of it so quickly. And this thing can't be given to the Feng clan yet. After the Feng clan obtains it, the first person they will silence is that rogue cultivator. Xiaohua once again understood why the rogue cultivator didn't sell the alchemy technique to the Feng clan. Humph, this young master got lucky. Xiaohua put the 5 books into his space, then touched his nose and secretly pondered. Perhaps that bastard also has the intention of shifting the disaster outside, but is this young master afraid of this? Soon after, Xiaohua immersed his mind into the space and organized the things of the 3 disciples of the Feng clan. The storage pouches of the 3 disciples of the Feng clan were all low-level goods, and there weren't many things inside. There were some spirit stones, some common medicinal pills and yellow talismans, and then there were a few books. Xiaohua still threw the spirit stones and yellow talismans to the side and cut the books first. However, after looking through them, he was slightly disappointed. There wasn't a single book related to cultivation methods. However, Xiaohua wasn't without any harvest. Among these books, one recorded some small spells that the disciples of the Feng clan often used, one recorded materials for refining tools, and one recorded a spell called Thunder Palm. What made Xiaohua the happiest was that in the middle of this book, there was actually a topographic map of the Feng residence. Inside the map, there was the internal and external structure of the Feng residence, as well as where there were restrictions and where there were secret rooms. Everything was clearly written. Hey, Feng clan, you're out of luck. Who told you to provoke this young master? Wait until I'm free, see how this young master will bring disaster to your Feng clan. Xiaohua carefully looked at the topographic map and coldly smiled. Next, Xiaohua looked at the Thunder Palm. This spell was a real spell and didn't rely on yellow talismans to cast it. He didn't know which disciple of the Feng clan had it. Since it was a real spell, the requirements were also very high. In addition to the requirements of cultivation and magic power, there was also a high requirement for the spell's comprehension. Xiaohua only looked at it roughly and threw it into the space. Even a 6th-layer Qi refining cultivator couldn't cultivate it, so how could his magic power be comparable to the Thunder Palm? The last thing Xiaohua looked at was also the most practical. It was the book of basic spells that the disciples of the Feng clan often used. Inside there were spells used by ordinary cultivators such as the flame technique, water flow technique, object controlling technique, and so on. There was even a method to make a summoning talisman. Xiaohua didn't look at it carefully and only roughly flipped through it. His heart was blooming with joy. This was what he needed the most besides cultivation methods. It wasn't that Shang Huoming didn't have these spells, but Xiaohua didn't enter Shang Huoming's door. Although he stayed in Yellow Flower Ridge for 3 years, he didn't learn a single one. At this moment, it seemed that this book of basic spells was Xiaohua's biggest harvest from killing the disciples of the Feng clan this time. Xiaohua flew with Li Xiaowen and the others for a long time. When Xiaohua finished organizing the things he just obtained, Li Xiaowen and the others stopped and wanted to rest. This time, the rest was different. Li Xiaowen first greeted Xiaohua and listened to his opinion. Xiaohua shook his head and said, "Fellow Taoist Li, you can do whatever you want. This poor Taoist doesn't have any opinion. In the future, don't ask this poor Taoist." When they landed in the forest, Xiaohua hid to the side and took out the book of basic spells from the space. He read it with relish. He ignored the eyes of the others who were secretly looking at him from afar and wanted to talk to him. When everyone saw this, they knew that Xiaohua didn't want to talk to them anymore. They closed their eyes and adjusted their breathing to recover their magic power as soon as possible. After the time it took to eat a meal, everyone got up and flew until nightfall. They stopped at a plain. "Have we arrived?" Xiaohua looked left and right. He didn't know where Yulian Mountain was. Fellow Taoist Xiao, this place is still some distance away from Yulian Mountain. Li Xiaowen smiled and pointed at a foggy area in front of him. That mountain covered in fog is Yulian Mountain. Oh? It's not too far, but it's hard to see clearly. Xiao Hua narrowed his eyes. This Yulian Mountain is covered in fog all day long. It's hard to see within a radius of 3 kilometers. It's really dangerous, Sun Fian whispered. Xiao Hua thought for a moment and asked, Yulian Mountain, can we go around it? Li Xiaowen nodded. Fellow Taoist Xiao asked a very good question. This is also what I wanted to say. Yulian Mountain is not like South Color Plain. We can go around it. We only need to go to the outer area of Yulian Mountain and open the silk bag that fellow Taoist Ma gave us. Once we know the next location, we can immediately come out and go around it. Although Yulian Mountain is a place where fog grows and there are many fog beasts inside, if we don't provoke them, what can they do? Yes. That's how it should be, Fan Daomao said happily. Why is fellow Taoist Fan so happy? Sun Fian sneered. Could it be that we need to go around it and enter Yulian Mountain just to open the silk bag? Without the silk bag, you don't need to go in? Fan Daomao glanced at Sun Fian and smiled. That's natural. I's silk bag has already been opened. There's no point in entering Yulian Mountain. Then why should I go in? So you're saying that only one fellow Taoist can enter the last location. Everyone else doesn't need to go in? Sun Fian immediately asked. This? Fan Daomao was at a loss for words. If it was as he thought, only the cultivator with the last silk bag that hadn't been opened could enter the last location. What was the point of others going in? Li Xiaowen waved his hand and smiled. Fellow Taoist Sun is right. We're a group and should advance and retreat together. Tomorrow, fellow Taoist Fan of Yulian Mountain will also enter with us. Fan Daomao thought for a moment and silently nodded. All right, everyone, it's best to enter Yulian Mountain at noon. We'll rest here for the night and depart tomorrow. Li Xiaowen looked at everyone and said, Fellow Taoists, it's best to rest early. Then, just like before, Li Xiaowen used the warning talisman and sat in the center of everyone, closing his eyes and meditating. Xiao Hua was the same as before. Seeing that they were resting, he immediately sat down cross-legged and took a marrow-cleansing pill. He worked hard to refine the medicinal power and improve his cultivation. Currently, he had enough medicinal pills. What he lacked was time. In the blink of an eye, it was the morning of the next day. By the time everyone got up, Xiao Hua had already refined 5 marrow-cleansing pills. This time, everyone saw that Xiao Hua's cultivation had improved. They could no longer remain indifferent. Congratulations, fellow Taoist Xiao, your cultivation has improved again. Li Xiaowen said very happily. Fellow Taoist Li is too polite. My cultivation is really not in your eyes. It's better if you don't mock I. Although Xiao Hua said this, he didn't feel the slightest bit ashamed. Li Xiaowen and the others also didn't look down on him in the slightest. Fellow Taoist Xiao, I'm afraid you didn't find a suitable cultivation method in the past, and only built a cart behind closed doors in your abode, right? You've only come out of Jinghua City for a few days and your cultivation is already comparable to several months of our previous cultivation. Fellow Taoist Xiao, your future is limitless. Fan Daomao was very moved. With all of you seniors in front, I really don't dare to be negligent. I only hope that my cultivation can catch up with all of you seniors in my lifetime. I will be satisfied. Xiao Hua said modestly. If you like this work, you're welcome to come to Qidian. -5. Chapter 1370. This young master has taken so many marrow-cleansing pills. It's equivalent to cultivating bitterly for several years. But when it comes to you, you only take it as increasing your cultivation for several months. Why is this young master's life so bitter? Xiao Hua silently cursed. Therefore, Xiao Hua flew at the back of the group, immersing himself in the foundational techniques he had just learned yesterday. However, before he could make a name for himself, they arrived at the Yulian Mountains. The Yulian Mountains were just as Li Xiaowen and the others had said. The mountain wasn't very tall, but the fog was extremely thick. From afar, it looked like a huge cloud had fallen from the 9 heavens onto the mortal world. What a big cotton candy! Xiaohua raised his head and couldn't help but groan. The person flying in front of Xiaohua was Sun Fian. Xiaohua's sigh just happened to be heard by him. Sun Fian, who was originally flying very confidently, twisted a few times and almost fell from the sky. Fellow Taoist Sun, be careful! Xiaohua promptly reminded him. Sun Fian had a strange expression on his face. He turned around and cupped his hands. Thank you for your concern, fellow Taoist Xiao! Then, he bit his lip and used all his strength to fly forward. Below Xiaohua and the others was a plain. It really felt as if it stretched as far as the eye could see. And right above this plain, the Yulian Mountains, which were shrouded in clouds and mist, appeared very abruptly, giving people a very strange feeling. Especially when Xiaohua and the others flew over from the sky. If they didn't mention the dangers of the Yulian Mountains, it would be a strange place. Fellow Taoist fan! Seeing that they were already near the Yulian Mountains, the clouds and mist in the mountains were constantly rolling like 10,000 galloping horses, but after going out of a certain range, the clouds and mist immediately dispersed, disappearing under the dazzling sunlight. They couldn't see any monsters. Xiaohua wasn't surprised. He looked at Fan Daomao, who had landed beside him, and asked softly, Fellow Taoist Fan, fellow Taoist Xiao, is something the matter? Fan Daomao's face was full of smiles. Xiaohua wasn't polite. He pointed at the cloud and mist and asked, Yesterday, fellow Taoist Li said that there were many cloud beasts on the Yulian Mountains. How come I haven't seen them? This cloud mist beast, what does it look like? I see. Fan Daomao didn't have a strange expression on his face when he heard this. He smiled and said, It's no wonder that fellow Taoist Xiao doesn't know. This Yulian mountain isn't like the southern color plains. It's not a place that people have to pass. Therefore, it's not very famous and not many people know about it. I happen to have an extremely good friend. 2 years ago, because he was picking grass from a stream, he had no choice but to enter the Yulian Mountains. He also had a narrow escape in the Yulian Mountains. When he returned, he complained to I. This time, I learned how powerful the cloud beast is. Shilian grass must be a specialty of the Yulian Mountains. What is it used for? Xiaohua looked like he was thirsty for knowledge. To let fellow Taoist Xiao know, the Yulian Mountains are shrouded in clouds all year round and the water attribute spiritual energy is very dense. This spiritual energy is also very dense, so sunlight can't penetrate it. This is the best place for creek grass to grow. In our country of Xi, only the Yulian Mountains are rich in creek grass. As for the Shilian herb, it was only a necessary ingredient for the cultivation of spiritual sense. Therefore, it's normal that fellow Taoist Xiao doesn't know. Cultivation of spiritual sense? Xiaohua stared blankly and asked curiously. This spiritual sense can also be cultivated? Fan Daomao shook his head slightly. I am only in the 4th layer of the Qi refining realm. There's still a long way to go before I reach the peak of the Qi refining realm. Naturally, I don't know if it's true or not. It's just hearsay. Fellow Taoist fan, tell me more. Xiaohua suddenly thought of the incantation he obtained. It had the effect of refreshing the mind. He couldn't help but become interested. He had already put the matter of the cloud beast to the back of his mind. It's said that when spiritual sense reaches the 12th layer of the Qi refining realm, it will be formed in the cultivator's Naiwen palace. This spiritual sense is the foundation for controlling magic tools and magic weapons. If one's spiritual sense is strong, it will be like an ordinary person's strength. In a fight, it will be very advantageous. However, the cultivation methods we usually practice can only increase our cultivation level. Our spiritual sense will only increase with our cultivation level. Fundamentally speaking, it has no effect on the improvement of our spiritual sense. Because of this, some people with great divine abilities have created their own cultivation methods to cultivate spiritual sense. It's like cultivating the body, walking the path of body cultivators. Oh, right. Fellow Taoist fan, you mentioned body cultivators. I have also heard of them, but I've never seen one. I heard they are all big and rough people. Is that true? Would fellow Taoist fan like this? Xiaohua thought of Zhang Jihao calling him a body cultivator. Although they were already in front of Yu Lianshan, Fan Daomao didn't seem to be impatient. He said, I have seen a few body cultivators before. They were all big and rough people. However, it's said that when they cultivate to the depth, they are not much different from ordinary cultivators. Actually, when it comes to body cultivators, there are two theories. The first is that in the primordial era, there were no magic spells, only innate divine abilities. Everyone had the body of a celestial being. Later on, cultivators came into existence, and magic spells and cultivation levels. Body cultivators, on the other hand, came from the primordial era. Celestial being? Body of a celestial being? Xiaohua's heart trembled. He couldn't help but think of the celestial being Xiao Yuehong spoke of. What about the second theory? They believe that body cultivators originate from the devil realm. Fellow Taoist Xiao should know that the people of the devil realm all have tyrannical bodies. They don't need any magic spells when fighting against us cultivators. The cultivation methods of the devil realm. Don't they come from the devil realm? Fan Daomao spoke with conviction. But Xiaohua thought about it, but in the end, he didn't say anything. If the devil realm didn't have magic spells, then where did the cultivation methods come from? If there were no cultivation methods, then wouldn't all devil cultivators be body cultivators? While the two of them were talking, Li Xiaowen and the others landed on the ground around 300 meters away from Universe Mountain. Li Xiaowen took out several musical talismans from his bosom and handed them to everyone. He warned, Fellow Taoists, please take care of these musical talismans. In the fog of Yu Lianshan, these consecutive note talismans are extremely important. If anyone gets lost in the fog, they will have to rely on these consecutive note talismans. Fellow Taoist Li's words are inappropriate. We've all entered Yu Lianshan, so who knows who didn't go the wrong way? If we all get lost, what's the use of sending these consecutive note talismans? Fan Daomao said angrily. Fellow Taoist fan. Forget it. I won't say anything unnecessary. Even if someone doesn't go in, it's still I because I's consecutive note talisman is the main talisman. If fellow Taoist fan agrees, I will give fellow Taoist I's silk bag. How about I wait outside? Wouldn't it be fine if fellow Taoist Li gave the main talisman to I? Fan Daomao said with a smile. I also want to find that treasure. I can't just run away like this, right? When Xiaohua heard this, his heart was moved. He had never been able to tell directions. Not to mention this fog, he would even go astray in broad daylight. Fan Daomao's method immediately moved his heart. That, fellow Taoist Li, fellow Taoist fan's words, make some sense. We only need to go in and open the silk bag. With fellow Taoist fan outside, wouldn't we have a much better chance? Xiaohua rubbed his nose and asked. If it was before yesterday, Li Xiaowen definitely wouldn't have listened to Xiaohua's words. He would definitely have ridiculed him without thinking, but now, Li Xiaowen was in a difficult position. As the leader of the five, he should be fair. Just like he said before, if Fan Daomao didn't go in this time, there would definitely be more and more people who wouldn't go in the future. In the end, if only one person went in, wouldn't that be terrible? Fellow Taoist Li, fellow Taoist Zhao's words make sense, Sun Fian said in a low voice. This Yulian mountain isn't like other places. If we lose our way, we'll all be trapped inside. It's better to have one person stand guard outside. Fellow Taoist fan, although he's a bit lucky, who told him to be so lucky? Li Xiaowen pondered for a moment and sighed. He glanced at Xiaohua intentionally or unintentionally. I only have a silk bag left. If others don't have any objections, I will also agree. Xiaohua knew he was talking about himself. he smiled and said. Let's take it one step at a time. It's better than getting lost in the fog all of a sudden. Li Xiaowen handed the voice transmission talisman's main talisman to Fan Dao Mao and walked into Yulian Mountains without looking back. Fan Dao Mao looked to his left and found a huge rock. He sat down cross-legged and closed his eyes to regulate his breathing. Just like the fog in the early morning, Xiaohua followed Li Xiaowen and the others to the edge of Yulian Mountain. When everyone's figures were swallowed up by the fog, Xiaohua's vision also started to become a vast expanse of white. Naturally, this was different from ordinary white fog. Ordinary white fog was faint. As soon as people approached it, they would be blown away by the sound of the wind. However, this fog was dense, almost as if it had settled in the air. Not only did it block people's vision, it also covered people's mouths and noses. A kind of rotten, fishy smell mixed with some decadent fragrance rushed over. When Xiaohua smelled this strange smell, he immediately sealed his mouth and nose, not letting a trace of it enter his body. However, this wasn't what worried Xiaohua the most. The strangest thing was that the fog seemed to be able to completely block his vision. Although Xiaohua's 5 senses were sharp, he could only see about 3 feet around him. Moreover, as everyone went deeper, this range was still shrinking. Strange, if we go inside, wouldn't we be unable to see anything? Xiaohua pondered. This is creek grass? Xiaohua lowered his head slightly, and saw a small blade of grass that was 1 inch tall. There were 3 leaves at the top, and each leaf had a saw-like edge. There were fine hairs growing on the edge of the saw-like edge. The hairs were slightly trembling in the clouds. It was unknown whether it was the clouds or the grass that was moving. Fellow Taoist Sun, Xiaohua whispered. This is creek grass? Hearing this, Sun Fian followed Xiaohua's finger and said with a smile, Fellow Taoist Xiao is indeed lucky. This is indeed creek grass. I have seen it before at Jinghua City's e.g. He. Xiaohua looked at the jealous expression on Sun Fian's face and felt comfortable in his heart. Of course, this creek grass was under everyone's feet. Only Xiaohua saw it. The others actually didn't notice it. Not good this place, why is there creek grass? Sun Fian waited for Xiaohua to quickly pick the creek grass and immediately whispered again. -5. Chapter 1371. What? Creek link grass? Li Xiaowen was a few steps ahead of Sun Fian. Hearing his surprised voice, he quickly turned around and asked, There's creek link grass here? Yes, fellow Taoist Li, could it be that there's something wrong? Seeing this, Xiaohua was startled. He faintly felt that something was wrong, so he took out the creek link grass. Sure enough, it really is the legendary creek link grass. Seeing this, Li Xiaowen frowned. He looked at Sun Fian and said, Fellow Taoist Sun must know that this creek link grass is the favorite food of the cloud beast. I've only heard that it grows in the depths of the Yulian Mountains. This is only the edge, how could it be here? Sun Fian was also worried. He quickly said, Fellow Taoist Li, let's hurry up and take out our silk bags. If we can open one, we'll quickly leave. I feel a bit uneasy. I also think so, Li Xiaowen said crisply. Fellow Taoists, let's not rush in first. Take out your silk bags and try. However, everyone took out their silk bags, but not a single one opened. Xiaohua looked at the 2 silk bags in his hands, his expression somewhat ugly. He originally thought that if he took one more, he would have more to rely on. Now it seemed that this might not be the case. Seeing this, Li Xiaowen said in a low voice, Presumably, we still need to go deeper into the Yulian Mountains. Everyone, hold your silk bags in your hands. Let's go and watch. Thus, everyone followed Li Xiaowen's words. As they quietly walked in, they paid attention to the silk bags in their hands. Xiaohua looked at Fu Shu, who was walking at the back. He looked at his silk bag that didn't seem to move, then looked at the thick clouds around them. He asked in a low voice, Fellow Taoist Fan, just now. I still haven't finished speaking. That cloud beast. What does it look like? Fu Shu stared at his silk bag. He raised his eyelids and said in a low voice, "This cloud beast. As the name suggests, it's a demonic beast born from clouds. This thing doesn't have a fixed shape. When mixed with ordinary clouds, it's impossible to distinguish it. Only chi refining 12th layer or foundation establishment seniors can see it with their divine sense. We can't see it with our eyes." "Oh? So it's like this." Xiaohua's heart skipped a beat. He opened his eyes wide and looked around. It was as if he was surrounded by cloud mist beasts. "Don't be afraid, fellow Taoist Xiao. The cloud mist beasts are born from the essence of the clouds. Most of them live in the depths of the universe mountains and don't dare to leave easily. Otherwise, fellow Taoist Qing wouldn't have let us come here." Fu Shu mocked himself. "A mature cloud mist beast is a second-rank spiritual beast, comparable to a 10th layer qi practitioner like me. How could it be unstoppable?" "A mature cloud mist beast?" Xiaohua said curiously. "The cloud beast is similar to this ordinary cloud. How did it grow?" "A newborn cloud mist beast is about the size of a fist," he said. "Its cultivation base is about the same as that of a second-level qi refining cultivator like me. As time passes, it absorbs more cloud mist quintessence. Its body grows larger and its cultivation base becomes more profound. When it reaches the 6th level of qi refining, the cloud mist beasts will begin to devour each other. Every time it devours another cloud mist beast, its cultivation will increase by a bit. When it has devoured enough, it will mature." When Xiaohua heard this, he smiled and said, "There's actually such a miraculous thing. You can increase your cultivation just by eating." "Hee, of course. Not only do cloud mist beasts devour their own kind, they also devour cultivators." A trace of fear appeared on Fu Shu's face. "What? Devour cultivators?" When Xiaohua heard this, he was also shocked. At this moment, an extremely weak divine sense faintly swept across Xiaohua's body. "Eh?" Xiaohua abruptly stopped in his tracks and looked around in panic. "Fellow Taoist Xiao? What's wrong?" Fu Shu asked curiously. Xiaohua paused for a moment. That feeling disappeared. "Could it be that I was too nervous?" "No, it's nothing." Xiaohua forced a smile. Before he could finish speaking, Fu Shu's surprised voice came from the front. "Fellow Taoists, my silk pouch has changed." When Xiaohua and the others heard this, they were all overjoyed. They quickly gathered around Fu Shu. At this moment, the silk pouch in Fu Shu's hand faintly emitted a light blue brilliance. Specks of fluorescent light danced up and down as if it had a life of its own. However, this fluorescent light constantly scattered in all directions. It was very eye-catching in the milky white cloud mist, but it didn't make any sound. "Fellow Taoist Fu, it's better for us to walk forward a bit," Li Xiaowen reminded. "Ai, that's right. I was thinking the same thing." Fu Shu bitterly smiled and slowly walked forward. "But," Xiaohua thought of his previous feeling and had a very bad feeling in his heart. Sure enough, as Li Xiaowen walked forward, the light blue brilliance became denser and denser. Slowly, it became like the surrounding clouds. After the time it took to brew a cup of tea, a sizzle sound was heard. It was as if boiling water had been poured on snow. The fluorescent light fiercely boiled, and Qing Fingnin's familiar voice came. "Fellow Taoists, thank you for your hard work. The next place we need to go is Yunxi Marsh. Please continue to work hard. I will be waiting for you at the destination." Qing Fingnin's voice disappeared, and the brilliance of the silk pouch also disappeared. "Hee, all right. Fellow Taoist Fu, put away the silk pouch," Li Xiaowen said with a smile. "We finally have an easy place to go." Xiaohua didn't know where Yunxi Marsh was, but he vaguely saw that Li Xiaowen and the others' faces were relaxed. He knew that this place wasn't too dangerous, so he quickly walked back with the others. After walking a few steps, Xiaohua felt more and more that something was wrong, but he couldn't tell exactly what was wrong. So he said in a low voice, "Fellow Taoist Li, why don't we use the consecutive note talisman?" Let's look at the direction and hurry back? Fellow Taoist Xiao, I have a plan in mind. We came straight here and went straight back. We didn't encounter any accidents on the way, so we won't use the consecutive note talisman. That consecutive note talisman, it'll be used less each time. So it's like that. Xiaohua bit his lip and took a deep breath. It's nothing. Then he looked at Fu Shu beside him and asked, Fellow Taoist fan, that cloud mist beast, what does it look like when it swallows cultivators? Fellow Taoist Xiao, when did you become so timid? Fu Shu also looked relaxed at this moment. He smiled and said, This place is still far from the depths of Yulian Mountains. The cloud mist beast won't come here. On the other hand, fellow Taoist Xiao is so noisy. Maybe it really will attract the cloud mist beast, Sun Fian said with a smile. But Xiaohua's heart was still not relaxed. He still asked, Fellow Taoist fan, please enlighten me. How does the cloud mist beast swallow cultivators? Hee, it's very strange when you talk about it. Fu Shu looked around and said with a smile, The cloud mist beast is born from clouds and mist. Clouds and mist are made of clouds and mist, so they don't have any specific form. I have only heard that the way the cloud mist beast swallows cultivators is very mysterious. It's the most difficult to detect. This is bad. Fellow Taoists, have you heard any rumors? Or have there been any sounds? Xiaohua suddenly came to a realization. Along the way, the clouds and mists were indeed dense, but there was also a slight breeze, and even the rustling of leaves and grass. But at this moment, it was simply deathly still. Ah! Everyone heard and cried out in alarm. Fellow Taoist Xiao, what do you feel under your feet? Li Xiaowen also cried out involuntarily. Hearing this, Xiaohua realized that although it was soft just now, he could clearly feel the grass and soil under his feet. But now, it was as if he was stepping on cotton. Consecutive note talisman, quick! Xiaohua slapped his storage bag and was about to take out the consecutive note talisman, but Sun Fian's hands were even faster. The consecutive note talisman had already been sent out. What made everyone's hearts jump was that the consecutive note talisman only flew about a foot in the air. It actually spun in the air and didn't fly forward anymore. What do we do? What do we do? Xiaohua's heart beat wildly. Thinking that he was actually in the stomach of the cloud mist beast, he couldn't help but feel his mouth go dry. Needless to say, that faintly discernible divine sense just now was definitely there. It was a mature cloud mist beast that had attacked them, and the way this cloud mist beast attacked them was really strange. It actually swallowed everyone into its body without them even realizing it. Fu Shu hurriedly flew up and said, Quick, let's hurry and fly out of Yulian Mountain. Although the cloud mist beast is powerful, but it doesn't have a physical body. If we fly out of its body before it swallows our magic power, we should be able to escape. Hearing this, Xiaohua was shocked. He silently used his cultivation technique to check. Sure enough, the true qi in his body was disappearing little by little. Looking at the others again, although they looked blurry, they all had panicked expressions. Following Fu Shu's flying figure, they all chased after him. Xiaohua didn't dare to be negligent. He activated the flying talisman, looked at Fu Shu's back, and chased after him in one breath. However, a strange thing happened again. Xiaohua's speed was much faster than Fu Shu's. According to Xiaohua's estimation, he only needed a few breaths of time to catch up, or even surpass, but Fu Shu's back was right in front of Xiaohua. No matter how Xiaohua activated his magic power, he couldn't catch up even a little bit. Oh no! Seeing this, Xiaohua knew that there was a problem. His body suddenly stopped, but Fu Shu's back was still in the fog not far away. Xiaohua's eyes narrowed, and his eyelids twitched. He stared at Fu Shu's back, not knowing what he was thinking. After a moment, Xiaohua clenched his teeth, took out the devil's spear from the space, and held it in his hand. He turned around and activated his magic power, pouring it all into the flying talisman. His body was like lightning, quickly flying into the depths of Yulian Mountain. Xiaohua's flying speed was originally comparable to the 11th or second layer of qi refining. At this time, he was flying at full speed. He felt as if countless clouds and fog were being pierced through by him, and an empty passage was being drilled through by him. However, the faster Xiaohua flew, the faster the true qi in his body flowed out, and his dermic powers were also consumed at a similarly fast rate. -5. Chapter 1372. Humph! Xiaohua's heart was filled with ruthlessness. He waved his hand and took out a marrow-cleansing pill from the space. He swallowed it in one gulp and silently operated his cultivation method. On one hand, he refined the medicinal efficacy of the marrow-cleansing pill to supplement the loss of true qi in his meridians. On the other hand, he stirred up his magic power and flew forward. Normally, Xiaohua would need 4 hours to refine the medicinal power of the marrow-cleansing pill. But now that it was a matter of life and death, he couldn't care about anything else. He urged his true qi to circulate in his meridians, rapidly refining the medicinal power. After the medicinal power was refined, the true qi was transformed into magic power to support Xiaohua's flight. On the other hand, it made up for the true qi that had been swallowed by the fog beast. Soon, in the time it took for a stick of incense to burn, the marrow-cleansing pill was refined. The time it took was much shorter than usual. Logically speaking, Xiaohua's meridians should have been overwhelmed by such a barbaric refinement of the marrow-cleansing pill and circulating true qi in his meridians without regard for anything else. It should have even caused some damage. But contrary to Xiaohua's expectations, his meridians were abnormally tough. He didn't feel any discomfort at all. Refining the marrow-cleansing pill like this was just enough to make up for the loss of true qi. Fight! Xiaohua knew that now was not the time to hesitate. He sent another marrow-cleansing pill into the air and maintained his original flight speed, constantly flying into the depths of Yulian Mountains. In Xiaohua's perception, he was flying in a straight line, but the real situation was not like this. In a huge mass of clouds, Xiaohua's flight path was an extremely irregular circle. This circle was tightly wrapped in the clouds. Similarly, in the middle of Xiaohua's circle, Li Xiaowen, Fu Shu, and Sun Fian were the same as Xiaohua, each of them flying around an irregular circle with great effort. They were the same as Xiaohua, all of them recklessly taking out medicinal pills that could replenish their true energy from their storage pouches. However, they were different from Xiaohua. Their faces were extremely panicked, and there was even some despair in their eyes. In particular, Fu Shu's cultivation was slightly weaker than the other two, and the range of his flight was also smaller. After 6 hours, when the medicinal pills in his storage bag were used up, the speed of his flight gradually slowed down, and the rate at which his true qi was flowing out also gradually increased. Seeing that he could no longer replenish his qi, Fu Shu's face turned red. He clapped his hands and the fireball talisman he bought from the Feng clan ZG appeared. He activated his Fa Li and threw it out. What made Fu Shu despair was that the fireball talisman that would normally explode as soon as it was thrown out, was currently wrapped up by the thick, watery cloud just as it was in midair. Only a faint flame flashed before it was annihilated. No! Fu Shu screamed in fear, but his voice only traveled a short distance. Immediately after, Fu Shu seemed to have gone mad. He took out all the yellow talismans he had and threw them all out without caring about the loss of his Fa Li. Unfortunately, all the yellow talismans were like clay oxen entering the sea. They couldn't even set off half a wave, and Fu Shu's true qi was exhausted in this final struggle. Following the exhaustion of his true qi, Fu Shu no longer had a trace of magic power to activate the flying talisman. His entire body fell to the ground. Oh, perhaps it couldn't be said to be the ground anymore, but rather the slightly trembling cloud. This cloud was ice cold. When Fu Shu's body fell, his face immediately turned pale. Because he didn't have any magic power to defend himself, the cloud immediately wrapped around his body. Fu Shu only had time to struggle a few times before he lost all his strength. Soon after, he was swallowed by the white, viscous cloud and disappeared without a trace. Li Xiaowen and Sun Fian were with Fu Shu. Their cultivations were slightly higher than Fu Shu's, but their circumstances weren't much better. At this time, they were also at the end of their rope. They were clenching their teeth and making a final, futile struggle. Looking at Xiaohua again, in the span of 6 hours, he had already finished consuming the remaining 20 or so marrow-cleansing pills he had obtained from Yongshang. He had even taken another 10 marrow-cleansing pills that he had just obtained from the Feng family's e.g. His true energy was maintained, and his magic power was also maintained. However, his cultivation base was continuously improving along with the circulation of his true energy, and the refinement of the medicinal power. And with the increase of his cultivation, Xiaohua's flying speed became even faster. As Xiaohua's flying speed increased, the circle he was flying in also continuously increased in size. He gradually approached the edge of the huge cloud, after Fu Shu disappeared, in the time it took to brew a cup of tea, Xiaohua took another marrow-cleansing pill. Just as he finished refining the marrow-cleansing pill, his speed suddenly increased. His figure, which was originally flying in a circle, suddenly rushed out in a straight line. Not only that, just as he was flying in a straight line, the tip of the demonic spear that Xiaohua had been holding in his hand all this time seemed to have been pierced by a layer of faintly discernible membrane. With a kind of faint schwa sound, the clouds and mist around Xiaohua began to violently boil. The boiling rapidly spread, and the clouds and mist within a radius of several thousand zhang were churning. Xiaohua, who had been observing the true qi in his body all this time, didn't seem to know that he was already flying in a straight line. All he knew was that he was extremely pleasantly surprised to see that his true qi had suddenly increased. The true qi produced by refining the marrow-cleansing pill didn't seem to have leaked out. Did I rush out? Xiaohua was pleasantly surprised as he thought. This young master has been flying for 6 hours. I'm afraid that I've traveled several thousand li? This cloud mist beast. Why is it even bigger than Yulian Shan? Thinking this, Xiaohua patted his storage pouch and took out the consecutive note talisman. He urged his transcendence energy, and the consecutive note talisman let out a sharp whistle and flew behind Xiaohua. It's flying in the opposite direction. Seeing this, Xiaohua was very pleasantly surprised. Without the slightest hesitation, he chased after the consecutive note talisman's sharp whistle and turned around to fly. Li Xiaowen and Sun Fian, who were extremely far away from Xiaohua, were originally on the verge of despair. The true qi in their bodies had already been exhausted. Their faces were ashen as they prepared to make a final struggle like Fu Shu. However, they suddenly felt that their true qi was no longer flowing out. Instead, as their true qi circulated in their meridians, new true qi appeared. Although they didn't know what had happened, they knew in their hearts that this seemed to be a turning point. Thinking the same as Xiaohua, they immediately took out the consecutive note talisman. Seeing the consecutive note talisman fly away, how could they not know that they had escaped? Desperately urging their last trace of transcendence energy, they chased after the consecutive note talisman and rushed out. In the time it took to eat half a meal, Li Xiaowen and Sun Fian flew out of the clouds of Yulianshan from different places. Li Xiaowen was the first to rush out. Facing him was Fan Daomao, who was anxiously and somewhat pleasantly surprised, standing in front of the clouds. Li Xiaowen's consecutive note talisman had stopped in front of Fan Daomao. Seeing Li Xiaowen come out, Fan Daomao took 2 steps forward and called out, "Fellow Taoist Li!" Without waiting for him to finish speaking, Li Xiaowen's figure fell from midair and fell straight to the ground. The transcendence energy in his body had been completely exhausted. Li Xiaowen didn't have time to say anything to Fan Daomao. He sat down cross-legged, his palms facing the sky, and circulated his cultivation method to recover his transcendence energy. Seeing this, how could Fan Daomao not know? He immediately stopped and stood there, not daring to disturb Li Xiaowen. Just as Fan Daomao stopped, another consecutive note talisman flew out, and Sun Fian flew out from another place in a sorry state. Like Li Xiaowen, Sun Fian had just flown out of the clouds of Yulianshan when he fell to the ground. Then, with Fan Daomao's support, he went to a place slightly further away and hurriedly recovered his transcendence energy. Then, the clouds of the entire Yulianshan regained their calm, and no more consecutive note talismans flew out from within. Fan Daomao looked at the calm clouds, and cold sweat broke out on his back. Of the 4 people who went in, only the 2 with the strongest cultivation came out alive. The other 2 were probably already dead. Fortunately, I was quick-witted and found a reason not to go in. Otherwise, Fan Daomao suddenly felt a wave of lingering fear. He shrunk his neck and was about to walk back. But at this moment, from an extremely far-away direction, another consecutive note talisman flew out from the clouds. Following that consecutive note talisman was a tall and thin figure that immediately darted out from the clouds. Looking at the flying speed, it was almost catching up to the consecutive note talisman. Xiaohua! Seeing that figure, Fan Daomao was immediately shocked. Xiaohua's cultivation was the lowest. How did he come out alive? But thinking about how Xiaohua could kill a 6th-level Qi refinement disciple of the Feng family, it was normal for him to come out alive. Xiaohua wasn't like Li Xiaowen and Sun Fian, who fell to the ground as soon as they came out of the clouds. Instead, he quickly flew in front of Fan Daomao and cupped his hands in greeting. Fellow Taoist Fan, did fellow Taoist Li and the others come out? Fan Daomao didn't dare to be negligent. He cupped his hands and said, Let me tell you, fellow Taoist Xiao. Fellow Taoist Li and fellow Taoist Sun just came out, but because their transcendence energy was exhausted, they're recuperating over there. As for fellow Taoist Fu, he still hasn't come out. So it's like this. Xiaohua used his hand to pinch his chin and looked at the fog of Yulianshan from the side. Fellow Taoist Xiao, could it be that you want to go save fellow Taoist Fu? Fan Daomao probed. Sigh, Xiaohua sighed. Admittedly, I have the heart, but I don't have the strength to spare. Moreover, according to what I encountered inside, I'm afraid fellow Taoist Fu has already perished. The cloudless beast was indeed frightening. It was 100 times more frightening than any opponent or demonic beast Sun Qing had encountered. Although the Ice Worm King of Nan Kaiping was formidable, but he could still encounter it. If he wasn't a match for it, perhaps he could escape far away, or use some top-grade fireball talisman to deal with it for a while. But this cloudless beast was simply impossible to guard against. Unwittingly, he was swallowed into its stomach. Now, according to Xiaohua's thoughts, if he hadn't coincidentally obtained dozens of marrow-cleansing pills in the space, and if he hadn't taken a lot of them within 6 hours and increased his cultivation by a bit, his flying speed would have surpassed that of an 11th-level Qi refinement cultivator and directly caught up to that of a 12th-level Qi refinement cultivator. In terms of speed, he had surpassed the cloudless beast's control and escaped from its body. Otherwise, even if Xiaohua could fly and had immense strength, he would have only met the same fate as Fu Shu. It was just that this fate was different sooner or later. Thinking of his own bitter experience, Xiaohua's heart was filled with lingering fear. How could he possibly dare to enter the cloudless beast to save someone? Just as he was speaking, Xiaohua suddenly felt his qi and blood surging within his body. It was something he had never encountered before. Not daring to be negligent, he cupped his hands towards Fan Daomao and sat down cross-legged. He also began to circulate his cultivation method and adjust his breathing. If you like this work, you are welcome to come to Qidian. Calm to vote for it. -5. Chapter 1373. Xiaohua circulated his true qi through his meridians, and only then did he check his cultivation base. Xiaohua almost jumped up from the ground. The night before Xiaohua entered the fog of the Yulian Mountains, he had just taken 5 marrow-cleansing pills, and his cultivation had barely entered the middle of the second layer of the qi refining realm. In just 6 hours, his cultivation had actually advanced by leaps and bounds, directly reaching the late stage of the second layer of the qi refining realm. There was even hope for him to break through to the third layer of the qi refining realm. However, when Xiaohua suppressed his ecstatic mood and calmly thought about it, he understood in his heart. Although it had only been 6 hours, he had taken more than 30 marrow-cleansing pills in one go. This was equivalent to 10 years of bitter cultivation. In addition to the marrow-cleansing pills and other medicinal pills he had taken before, it was almost equivalent to 20 years of bitter cultivation. Others had used 1 or 2 years of time, but he had actually used 20 years of bitter cultivation to barely reach the late stage of the second layer of qi refining. This really made people speechless. Of course, he had used 6 hours to refine more than 30 marrow-cleansing pills, and most of the residual medicinal power was distributed in his meridians. The sudden increase in his cultivation base also made his meridians very uncomfortable, which was why his qi and blood were surging. Knowing the reason, Xiaohua was relieved. Following Shang Huaming's cultivation method, he refined the residual medicinal power in his meridians bit by bit, slowly stabilizing his cultivation base. Seeing Xiaohua, Li Xiaowen, and Sun Fian all sitting cross-legged and adjusting their breathing, Fan Daomao couldn't help but feel a bit irritated. As soon as the three of them left the fog, they hurriedly recovered their magic power and didn't say anything to him. Although he knew that Fu Shu had fallen in Yulian Mountains, he still didn't know who had sent the silk bag. If Fu Shu's silk bag hadn't been opened, even if the three of them escaped, their treasure-hunting path could be considered cut off. They could only return to Jinghua City, with no possibility of advancing any further. How could he not be anxious? After wandering around for a while, the sky gradually darkened. Xiaohua and the others didn't get up, so Fan Daomao had no choice but to sit down and cultivate. Soon, the night arrived. Inside Xiaohua's space, the reverse light stopped rotating. Boundless starlight fell down, and starlight seeped into every part of Xiaohua's body. Along with the medicinal efficacy in his meridians, it was refined into his true qi bit by bit. The stars moved, and the night quickly passed. When the first ray of sunlight shone from the east, Xiaohua opened his eyes, and a faintly discernible flame flashed in his eyes. Xiaohua opened his mouth, and a bit of sun essence was sucked into his body. "Congratulations, fellow Taoist Xiao! I'm about to break through to the third layer of qi refining." Li Xiaowen's voice sounded from behind Xiaohua. Xiaohua turned around with a smile, looked at Li Xiaowen and also said, "Congratulations, congratulations. Fellow Taoist Li's cultivation has also improved. It seems like you're about to break through to the fifth layer of qi refining. I am still far inferior to you, fellow Taoist. Fellow Taoist Sun, your cultivation is also the same as fellow Taoist Li's. I really have to congratulate you." Xiaohua saw Sun Fian walking over and also cupped his hands with a smile. Sun Fian bitterly smiled and shook his head. His face carried a trace of joy, but also a trace of fear. He said, "Although I've improved, the price is really big. If it wasn't for the life and death struggle in the mist, it would be impossible for me to advance by leaps and bounds. Fellow Taoist Fu still hasn't come out." Xiaohua looked around and said regretfully, "I haven't seen you for a night, I'm afraid. Yesterday's situation was really critical." Li Xiaowen sighed and said, "I flew up, but I couldn't see your figures. I knew that only by constantly flying forward could I have a chance to escape. But after flying for more than 6 hours, just as I was about to give up, a turn for the better appeared. I already asked fellow Taoist Sun, he had the same experience as I. I don't know how fellow Taoist Xiao is," Xiaohua said with a smile. "I was the same as fellow Taoist Li and fellow Taoist Sun. I was flying the whole time. The moment I escaped was about the same as the two of you. There was nothing unusual. But..." Li Xiaowen still felt a bit strange. Originally, Xiaohua's flying speed was extremely fast, but he escaped after the two of them. If he didn't encounter something, how could he be late? Besides, 4 people were trapped and 3 people escaped. If it wasn't for some unforeseen event, how could 3 low-level aura refining cultivators escape from the stomach of a Foundation establishment cloud mist beast? Li Xiaowen knew that he didn't have such ability, and Sun Fian shouldn't have either. So the reason naturally fell on Xiaohua's head. As for Xiaohua himself, although he vaguely felt that it had something to do with him. After all, it was only a speculation. He couldn't take the credit for it, so he could only shake his head. Alas, no matter what, the three of you were able to escape, and you also know that the next place we are going to is Yunshi Marsh. Fan Daomao's gloomy expression was swept away as he spoke. And that's right. Sun Fian nodded. Although fellow Taoist Fu died, after all, his spinneret has been opened. It can be considered that he didn't die in vain. Xiaohua sighed slightly. There were some calculations in his heart. These 6 places, 6 spinnerets, 1 for each of the 6 people. They had just passed through 2 places, and 2 people had already died. The next 4 places, he didn't know how many people would survive. The true curtain of this treasure hunt hadn't been drawn yet, but the tragic deaths were far from what Xiaohua had imagined when he left Jingbo City that day. Why does it feel like this is a test of our cultivation? Xiaohua inwardly thought. According to what fellow Taoist Ma said, these previous operations were also like this. Could it be that some loose cultivators with insufficient cultivation were eliminated midway? And in the end, only the elites remained? Heaven-Forsaken's method is a bit strange. But survival of the fittest is also normal. Could it be Heaven-Forsaken wants to use this treasure hunt to wash away the dregs that joined Heaven-Forsaken? Only leaving behind the elites among the loose cultivators. And the goal of leaving behind the elites, is it the same as Jingbo City, to become a force of their own? Xiaohua was thinking a bit too far. Fellow Taoist Xiao. Although Li Xiaowen didn't know whether Yu Lianshan's escape had anything to do with Xiaohua, in his heart, he already had a whole new level of respect for Xiaohua. When he spoke, he was a lot more respectful. Fellow Taoist Xiao, don't be sad. Cultivators like us go against the heavens and have the possibility of being eliminated at any moment. And loose cultivators like us are even more miserable. Fellow Taoist Fu's experience is also common in the cultivation world. Let's take this as a warning and pay more attention. And many thanks for fellow Taoist Li's reminder. Xiaohua cupped his hands in thanks. Let's go, fellow Taoist Xiao. Yunshi Marsh is 5 days away from here. We still need to hurry, Fan Daomao reminded. And that's how it should be. Sun Fian looked back at Yu Lianshan with lingering fear. This place. Even if I stay here for a moment longer, I will still panic. It's better to leave as soon as possible. The 4 of them started their journey again, and flew in the other direction of Yu Lianshan. After flying for a while, Xiaohua suddenly asked, Fellow Taoist Li, I have something to ask? Fellow Taoist Xiao, there's no harm in asking. Li Xiaowen was very amiable. I want to know, from Jingbo City, to southern Color Ping, to Yu Lianshan, and now to Yunshi Marsh, these few places. Do they have any relation? How should I put it? I just feel that through these few places, we can find out the approximate location of our final destination. Li Xiaowen smiled bitterly and looked at Fan Daomao and Sun Fian. This question. To be honest, fellow Taoist Xiao, I also thought about it for a long time. I presume fellow Taoist Fan and fellow Taoist Sun have also thought about it. And Fan Daomao and Sun Fian both nodded. It's a pity. Looking at your expressions, I'm afraid you two have no clue at all, just like I, right? Exactly. Fan Daomao sighed. Southern Color Ping, Yu Lianshan, and Yunshi Marsh are originally a triangle. There's a huge gap in the middle. In this area, I also didn't hear of any special places to pay attention to. If it's said that there's some treasure in Southern Color Ping or Yu Lianshan, I can believe it, but unfortunately these 2 places are just passing by. The most puzzling thing is that apart from these 3 places, we still have 2 more places to go. Only the last thread can tell us the specific places. Where those 2 places are. We also don't know. I have 2 questions. Xiaohua looked at the quiet sky in the distance and said, One is, there are more than 100 loose cultivators in our Heaven-Forsaken. There are also dozens of teams. Don't tell me, they also have to go through so many dangerous places? Alas, our country of Xi is vast and rich in resources. There are too many dangerous places. Not to mention Tingyan Yuan, one of the top 10 dangerous places, even Mo Jiao Black Forest, Yanlin Mountain Swamp, and other places are not much worse than Tingyan Yuan. It's just that they aren't famous. And there are even more dangerous places like Southern Colorping and Yulianshan that even I, a loose cultivator, have the courage to enter. It's really easy for Heaven Forsaken to pick out some of these places. Li Xiaowen smiled bitterly. Xiaohua nodded and asked again. I have a second question. These dangerous places, even if they have their own characteristics, how can fellow Taoist Qing go to each of these places one by one? Moreover, only special spinnerets can be opened in special places. In the cultivation world, there are countless spells and magical powers. Everyone has their own secrets. Even fellow Taoist Xiao. I'm afraid he has spells that we can't reach, let alone fellow Taoist Qing. Sun Fian shook his head slightly. Xiaohua still didn't give up. Southern Colorping has ice worms and an extremely cold climate. Yulianshan has fog beasts and clouds that don't disperse for years. These should be the factors that activate the spells in the threads, right? What's so special about Yinshizhe? Maybe we don't have to go to the truly dangerous places. We can open the threads in places that are similar to these places? Ha ha ha, fellow Taoist Zhao's idea is really interesting. However, it's not that we haven't thought of this before, but, as long as there are places similar to Yulianshan and Southern Colorping, there are also demonic beasts. The ice worms and fog beasts are only at the second stage. The other places are at the third and fourth stage. They're far from what loose cultivators like us can handle. Fan Daomao explained to Xiaohua with a smile. Alas, so it's like this. Xiaohua was speechless. It seemed that he could only follow Qing Fengming's arrangement and take it step by step. -5. Chapter 1374. In the next 5 days, Li Xiaowen and the others were extra careful. Nothing special happened, but the weather became more and more rainy. From time to time, there would be continuous drizzling and even torrential downpours, which slightly delayed their journey. During these 5 days, whenever Xiaohua rested at night, he would take marrow-cleansing pills. Although each marrow-cleansing pill was only equivalent to 4 months of bitter cultivation, Xiaohua's cultivation was gradually improving step by step as he took them one after another. In addition to the nighttime cultivation, Xiaohua also stepped up his cultivation during the day. Even during the flight, he mobilized his true qi and circulated it in his meridians according to the circulation. Xiaohua was only at the second level of the qi refining realm. This kind of cultivation speed was indeed a bit fast, but in Li Xiaowen's eyes, it didn't seem that surprising. After all, they also came from the low level of the qi refining realm. The second level of the qi refining realm was just the beginning of cultivation, so it really didn't count as anything. On this day, it was raining cats and dogs. Everyone used their defensive yellow talismans to form a transparent light shield around their bodies, blocking the rain outside. There wasn't a trace of rain on their Taoist robes, and they were as dry as usual. Fortunately, there isn't any thunder in the rain. Otherwise, today would be like yesterday, hiding in the cave and quietly cultivating. Fan Daomao looked at the dark sky and said loudly, "Yes. It should have been a 5-day journey, but it just had to be delayed by a day. Counting with my fingers, we've been away from Jinghua City for more than 10 days, and the 30 days of the silk capsule's destruction are not far away. We can't delay any longer." Li Xiaowen nodded. "Look, the silvery bright place ahead should be Yunxi Marsh," Sun Fian said as he pointed. Hearing this, Xiaohua stopped the true qi circulating in his meridians and looked up. Sure enough, in the distance, there was a shiny place, similar to a small mirror. Why does it look like Yunxi Marsh is similar to Jinghua City? Xiaohua asked curiously. "Haha, it's a coincidence that I've come," Li Xiaowen said with a smile. "Jinghua City has countless lakes as its protective array. The entire lake looks like a bronze mirror. As for Yunchi Marsh, although it looks like countless lakes, that's because it's raining. When the rain stops, countless swamps of different sizes will be revealed. These swamps will be shrouded in white miasma from time to time. It's far from what we see now. Miasma? Xiaohua immediately thought of the clouds and mist of the Yulian Mountains, and his face paled. Fellow Taoist Xiao, don't be afraid. Fan Daomao had already seen this coming. He smiled and said, The Yunchi Marsh is an insurmountable barrier for mortals, but for cultivators like us, it's a piece of cake. Even the most powerful water butterfly in the Yunchi Marsh is only a first-rank demon beast. Its strength is only comparable to a second-level refinement cultivator. It's extremely easy to deal with it. Sun Fian also said, Most of the swamps within several hundred miles of Yunchi Swamp are ordinary swamps. Only in the depths of the swamp are there water-patterned butterflies, so we don't have to be afraid. Seeing that Li Xiaowen and the others weren't afraid, Xiaohua was naturally relieved. In the time it took to eat a meal, the four of them arrived at the edge of Yunchi Marsh. At this time, the pouring rain had stopped, and the sun was shining brightly. If it weren't for the swamps in front of them, no one would have thought that it was still raining just a moment ago. In the swamp closest to them, the mirror-like pool of water gradually became lively. Countless water frogs, toads, water snakes, and other creatures began to swim in the water and began to hunt for food. There were also dragonflies and other creatures on the surface of the water. They either touched the water or flew to catch the tiny flying insects on the surface of the water or beside the water plants. There were also swallow-like birds that flew from afar and quickly slid down. They swooped down on the water, either holding a struggling small fish in their beaks or catching a young water snake in their claws. After the rain, the swamp instantly came alive. Fellow Taoist Li, this swamp is several hundred miles wide. Where should we go to open this silk bag? Xiaohua looked at the swamp full of vitality and felt a trace of joy in his heart. Soon after, he came to a realization. This is difficult to do. Li Xiaowen nodded and said, This Yunchi Marsh is indeed safe and has no danger. However, the area is too large. I don't know where is the best place to open the silk bag. Let's go in and take a look. We'll go together. Just like in Yulian Mountain, we'll see who can open the silk bag, Sun Fian suggested. No one had any other ideas, so this was the only way. Thus they flew up again, each holding a silk bag in their hands, and flew into Yunchi Marsh. Under everyone's feet was a swamp. It had just rained and was filled with water. At this moment, under the scorching sun, countless amounts of water vapor evaporated. Gradually, this swamp country became a land of mist. It was somewhat similar to Yulian Mountains. However, within this mist, there was a rather fishy stench that was nauseating. Xiaohua and the others closed their mouths and noses before daring to move forward. After flying for an unknown period of time, no one's silk bag had any changes. Looking at the water vapor lingering in the air, Li Xiaowen frowned slightly. Just as he was about to speak, he heard Sun Fian exclaim in surprise. He pointed at the misty place in the distance and shouted, Fellow Taoist Li, look, isn't that the Rainbow Epiphany? Rainbow Epiphany? Xiaohua stared blankly. He had never heard of this name before. Following Sun Fian's finger, he saw that about a few hundred feet to their right, in the middle of the mist, there was a 3-foot-long rainbow suspended in the mist. It looked very blurry, but the rainbow color was different from the surrounding white mist. It was very eye-catching. However, if Sun Fian hadn't seen it, the others probably wouldn't have noticed it. This is the Rainbow Epiphany? What is this? Isn't it just a rainbow? It looks no different from a real rainbow. Xiaohua was somewhat bewildered. However, he also knew that this definitely wasn't a real rainbow. The real thing was hanging in the sky. Seeing this, Li Xiaowen's face also revealed ecstasy. His voice was somewhat trembling. Hurry, hurry, if we can get this Rainbow Epiphany, even if we can't find the silk bag and fellow Taoist Qing and the others, this trip won't be in vain. While speaking, Li Xiaowen and Sun Fian both urged their magic power. Without even calling out to Xiaohua and Fan Daomao, they flew in the direction of the Rainbow Epiphany. Fan Daomao had obviously heard of the Rainbow Epiphyllum's reputation, but he was still half a beat slower than Li Xiaowen and the others, and his cultivation was also much lower. By the time he caught up, he was already more than 10 feet behind. Xiaohua frowned and used his finger to scratch his chin. Then his eyebrows raised, and he very easily caught up to Fan Daomao. He asked in a low voice, "Fellow Taoist Fan, this Rainbow Epiphany, what is this thing?" Fan Daomao looked at Xiaohua very enviously. Then he looked at Li Xiaowen and Sun Fian in front of him. Knowing that he might not be able to catch up to them, he said, I don't know how fellow Taoists cultivated before. You don't even know about this Rainbow Epiphany? Do I need to know?" Xiaohua's face was slightly cold. Cough, cough. Fan Daomao realized that his words were inappropriate. He coughed twice to cover it up. "Fellow Taoist Xiao must know about the Foundation Establishment Pill, right?" "Nonsense, I naturally know this." Xiaohua rolled his eyes. "Do you think I's an idiot?" "Of course not, fellow Taoist Xiao. Since you know about the Foundation Establishment Pill, you naturally know about the exquisite grass. And the exquisite grass is the main ingredient for refining the Foundation Establishment Pill. I naturally know this." Xiaohua interrupted without hesitation. "Fellow Taoist Fan, just say it directly. Why are you beating around the bush for no reason? It's like this. The exquisite grass is the main ingredient for refining the Foundation Establishment Pill, and this Rainbow Epiphany is the main ingredient for refining the Revolving Illumination Pill. Fellow Taoist Xiao should know how precious this Rainbow Epiphany is." Fan Daomao laughed. "I don't know," Xiaohua said decisively. "Xiao. Fellow Taoist Xiao shouldn't not know about the Revolving Illumination Pill, right?" Fan Daomao was flabbergasted. "This? Of course I don't know. I hope fellow Taoist Fan can dispel my doubts." Xiaohua's face was slightly red as he cupped his hands. "And so it's like this." Fan Daomao rolled his eyes and said in a low voice, "Time is tight. Fellow Taoist Xiao, I's flying speed is too slow. I'm afraid I can't catch up to fellow Taoist Li and fellow Taoist Sun. Fellow Taoist Dao's flying speed is much faster than ours. If we can catch up to fellow Taoist Li and fellow Taoist Sun and obtain this Rainbow Epiphany, I will not only tell you about the Revolving Illumination Pill, but also how to deal with this Rainbow Epiphany. As long as fellow Taoist Xiao gives 30% of the benefits to I, it's fine. This? I'm afraid it's not appropriate." Xiaohua looked at Li Xiaowen and Sun Fian in the distance, somewhat hesitant. "Sigh, fellow Taoist Xiao, with your fearful appearance, how can you survive in the cultivation world? Didn't you see that Li Xiaowen and Sun Fian didn't even say anything to us before rushing forward? Look again, Li Xiaowen and Sun Fian, aren't the two of them also quite a bit of distance apart? Aren't they also worried about each other?" Fan Daomao stood in the air, almost stamping his feet. "Besides, aren't we together looking for treasures? Besides the matter of the silk bag, we have to deal with it together. Normally, according to convention, it's whoever arrives first gets first." Xiaohua's heart stirred. That's right, this Rainbow Epiphany was originally an ownerless item. Whoever had the ability could obtain it first. Right now, he was poor and had nothing. When he needed something, no matter what this Rainbow Epiphany was used for, as long as it was precious, he could exchange it for some cultivation method if he obtained it. Thinking this, Xiaohua chuckled and said, "Fellow Taoist Fan, wait a moment. Let's talk about it after I get it." As he spoke, he activated the flying talisman. His flying speed suddenly increased by several times, rapidly flying forward. When Fan Daomao saw that Xiaohua's speed was even faster than before, shock appeared in his eyes. Soon after, a pensive expression appeared on his face. Although Xiaohua increased his speed, after all, he had delayed them for a long time. Li Xiaowen and Sun Fian were both afraid that Xiaohua would catch up to them, so they had already used all their strength. By the time Xiaohua had chased after them for more than half of the time, the two of them had already arrived in front of the Rainbow Epiphany. If you like this work, you are welcome to come to Qidian. Com to vote for it. -5. Chapter 1375. However, when Li Xiaowen and the others had just flown to about 10 feet away from the rainbow epiphyllum, a fiery red brilliance soared into the sky. Urgently, a young cultivator about 10 years old, with a somewhat arrogant face, wearing a light green Taoist robe, holding a leaf-shaped yellow talisman in his hand, appeared from the brilliance, blocking in front of Li Xiaowen and Sun Fian with a vigilant look. Fellow Taoists, please don't go forward. This rainbow cloud is something that my blazing flame sect has long since taken a fancy to. If you get too close, I'm afraid there will be some misunderstanding. That cultivator looked to be only at the 4th level of Qi refining, but his bearing was extraordinary. He didn't give off the feeling that he was being looked down upon because of his young age. Ah? Sun Fian and Li Xiaowen saw this and stopped in midair. Xiaohua also narrowed his eyes and slowed down. This? Fellow Taoists, since this rainbow cloud, your sect has long since taken a fancy to it, but why don't you harvest it? Li Xiaowen reluctantly looked at the 7-colored brilliance not far away and asked curiously. This fellow Taoist. I already said clearly that this rainbow cloud belongs to my blazing flame sect. As for when my sect will harvest it, I'm afraid you don't have to worry about it, right? That cultivator coldly said. I don't dare. I only thought, this rainbow cloud is a spirit herb, there must be a spirit creature protecting it. If fellow Taoist is unable to harvest it, we can also help. When the time comes, Sun Fian said with a smile. Without waiting for Sun Fian to finish speaking, that cultivator decisively interrupted. There's no need to trouble fellow Taoists, I's 2 senior brothers have already. Before he finished speaking, that cultivator felt that he had misspoken and hurriedly shut his mouth. However, just this half of the sentence was enough for Sun Fian and Li Xiaowen. The two looked at each other and looked around. This corner of the swamp was currently filled with smoke and was a blur. They couldn't see anything clearly. The 2 senior brothers that the cultivator spoke of, they didn't know where they led the spirit beast guarding the spirit herb to. With such an excellent opportunity, how could Li Xiaowen and the others let it go? At this time, Fan Daomao also overtook Xiaohua and flew to the side of Li Xiaowen and the others. Quick, fellow Taoist Li Xiaowen, fellow Taoist Sun Fian, fellow Taoist Sun. I'll pluck the rainbow epiphyllum. You guys kill this little cultivator, and we'll divide the rainbow epiphyllum equally. Fan Daomao was very agile. His figure didn't stop in the slightest as he directly flew towards the rainbow cloud. As he flew past Li Xiaowen and the others, he didn't forget to call out their names. If it wasn't for the lack of time, wouldn't he have called out Xiaohua's name as well? When Li Xiaowen and Sun Fian heard this, they couldn't help but reveal anger in their eyes. They originally had the same idea as Fan Daomao, but they were still somewhat hesitant. After all, the Blazing Flame sect wasn't a small sect. If their hands and feet weren't clean, it would inevitably bring about trouble for them in the future. But now, Fan Daomao hadn't even called out his own name yet, and their names were already heard by this little cultivator. Leaving them, there was only one choice. What made them feel the most ashamed and angry was that they were originally in front. Even if they plucked the spiritual herb, the initiative was still in their hands. However, Fan Daomao was one step ahead of them. The situation had already changed, and they had no choice but to listen to Fan Daomao's arrangements. However, as matters stood, what other choice did they have? No, absolutely no. Therefore, even though Li Xiaowen and Sun Fian were unhappy, they still slapped their storage pouches and each took out a yellow talisman, throwing it towards the young cultivator. Seeing the 2 4th-layer Qi refining cultivators attacking together, the young cultivator's eyes revealed a hint of panic. He slapped his hand, and the leaf-shaped yellow talisman in his hand released a fiery red brilliance. It rushed down from the top of his head, forming a thin light screen in front of him. Just as the light screen formed, Li Xiaowen's icicle talisman and Sun Fian's hailstorm talisman shot over. The two knew the power of the Blazing Flame sect, so they used the water attribute Yellow Talisman, which was the opposite of the Blazing Flame sect's. Kacha, kacha, a series of sounds rang out. Li Xiaowen's low-grade icicle talisman flew over first. Like dozens of ice arrows, it hit the light screen. At the same time the icicles melted, tiny cracks also appeared on the thin light screen. Immediately after, Sun Fian's mid-grade hailstorm talisman attacked. The fist-sized spiritual energy was condensed into a circle, and with a poo-poo sound, it hit the cracked light screen. The enormous impact and the sharpness of the spiritual energy explosion directly tore the light screen apart. Even so, the young cultivator only had a trace of panic. His left hand slapped his storage pouch, and a crimson-yellow talisman was taken out. He urged his magic power, and a fiery red flying sword suddenly appeared. It paused in the air for a moment, and then stabbed towards Sun Fian. At this moment, Xiaohua had already arrived behind Li Xiaowen and the others. He was contemplating whether or not he should go forward. Sun Fian saw his hailstorm talisman succeed, and his opponent's fire sword talisman flew out. He couldn't help but be somewhat anxious. His eyes flashed, and he shouted loudly, "Xiaohua, fellow Taoist Xiao, why haven't you made your move yet?" Sun Fian's move was exactly the same as Fan Daomao's. He wanted to put Xiaohua in a situation where he had no choice but to make a move. But, when Xiaohua heard this, his face relaxed instead. He crossed his arms in front of his chest, and on the contrary, looked on coldly from the sidelines. "You!" When Sun Fian saw this, he couldn't help but stare blankly. He really didn't think that his words would actually make Xiaohua make a decision. He actually didn't care anymore. Exactly. Xiaohua was originally in a bit of a dilemma. On one hand, he and Li Xiaowen and the others had gone through some life and death situations together. If he didn't help, he was afraid it wouldn't be right. But on the other hand, the Blazing Flame sect already had disciples picking here. Moreover, from what the young cultivator said, they already had 2 senior brothers who lured away the spirit beasts guarding the spirit herbs. They were only short of picking the rainbow epiphyllum. If he and the Blazing Flame sect saw it at the same time, even if he saw it a bit later, as long as he and the Blazing Flame sect were about the same time, Xiaohua absolutely wouldn't hesitate. He would definitely fly in front of the others. But now, if he made his move, wouldn't it be the same as Zhang Jihao's cutting of the path, and the 100 Herb sect's ugly conduct? What made Xiaohua most disgusted was that Sun Fian actually wanted to use despicable means to force him to make his move. If, before the Feng clan's gathering, he probably wouldn't even pay attention to him, right? Now that he knew his methods, he wanted to tie him to them. How could he let him off so easily? Xiaohua didn't know what the revolving illumination pill was, but looking at the reactions of Li Xiaowen and the others, Xiaohua naturally knew the rarity of the rainbow epiphyllum. But if he was reduced to being in the same boat with such a repulsive person because of this spiritual object, Xiaohua really despised it. Thus, in an instant, Xiaohua made a decision. It was a decision that Sun Fian and Li Xiaowen couldn't understand. Seeing the flame sword stabbing towards them, the enchanting flames of the flying sword already burning in front of them, Sun Fian didn't have time to curse Xiaohua. He hurriedly retreated and grabbed with his hand, throwing out an ice-bound talisman, wanting to block the flame sword. That young cultivator was admittedly at the 4th level of qi refining, but his cultivation was still a bit lower than Sun Fian and the others. The ice-bound talisman hit the flame sword's tip. With a ka sound, a 3-foot-thick block of ice was formed, sealing the flame sword inside, unable to be used again. On the other side, Li Xiaowen took the opportunity to throw out an icicle talisman, hitting the cultivator's waist. A burst of brilliance flashed, and the defensive yellow talisman on the cultivator's body was annihilated. An icicle pierced deeply into the cultivator's Taoist robe, and blood seeped out along the Taoist robe. That young cultivator's complexion instantly paled, but he still refused to retreat. He clenched his teeth and urged his magic power. His face suddenly turned dark red, and more blood flowed out from his waist. Urgently, the leaf-shaped yellow talisman in his hand once again emitted a brilliance that soared into the sky, then quickly fell in front of him. This time, it didn't form a light screen, but rather a large ball of fire, slowly rotating in front of the cultivator's eyes. Seeing that the young cultivator seemed to be stubbornly resisting, Li Xiaowen and Sun Fian weren't moved in the slightest. Their eyes flashed with a trace of excitement, and they threw out the yellow talismans they had prepared long ago. That cultivator didn't hesitate. As soon as the ball of fire formed in front of him, he placed both hands on the leaf-shaped yellow talisman and pointed his hands. The ball of fire split into two with a hua sound. Following the cultivator's very difficult and heavy hand seals, it immediately turned into two raging flames, respectively rushing towards Li Xiaowen and Sun Fian. The flames were very fierce. The icicles, ice seals, and confinement talismans Li Xiaowen and Sun Fian threw out were all turned into ashes in the flames, not having the slightest effect. "This is bad!" Seeing this, Li Xiaowen was greatly alarmed. He hurriedly withdrew, wanting to attack from other places, but the flames were very fast. Just as Li Xiaowen chanted, the flames rushed in front of him. Sun Fian was similarly alarmed. If nothing unexpected happened, he would really become a cloud of smoke wherever the flames passed. However, at this critical moment, the flames suddenly stopped. They quietly surged in front of the two people for a moment, then immediately shrank back and disappeared. Li Xiaowen and Sun Fian's faces were filled with pleasant surprise after surviving a calamity. They looked at the young cultivator from the flame sect, whose face was flushed, his body bent, and the robe around his waist was completely soaked in blood. Was there any need to say more? He was already powerless to activate the leaf-shaped yellow talisman. "The heavens are helping me!" Sun Fian laughed loudly. He slapped his storage bag and took out several confinement talismans, hailstorm talismans, and so on. He activated his magic power, and was about to kill that young cultivator on the spot. Ah! At this moment, from under the clouds, where the rainbow epiphyllum appeared in the swamp, Fan Daomao's heart-wrenching scream came. Shortly after, an angry roar came from below everyone. "Where did this rascal come from? You actually dare to have ideas about my flame sect? Quickly hand over your life!" This angry roar was truly shocking. It was as if a golden bell had rung in front of Xiao Hua and the others. How could Xiao Hua dare to hesitate? He didn't even see who had come. He activated his magic power, and his figure flew rapidly in the opposite direction. If you like this work, you are welcome to come to Qidian. -5. Chapter 1376. Admittedly, the 7 colors of the rainbow epiphyllum were only 100 feet away, but that angry shout seemed to be far more than 100 feet under the faint clouds. However, that cultivator's magic power followed that angry shout. As soon as Xiao Hua came into contact with it, he immediately knew that this so-called senior martial brother of the Blazing Flame School's 4th layer aura refining cultivator absolutely wasn't a 5th or 6th layer aura refining cultivator like he previously guessed, but a full 8th layer aura refining cultivator. Because of this, Xiao Hua didn't even think about it, and promptly made a decision to flee in another direction. As for Li Xiaowen and Sun Fian, was there even a need to say anything? They simply sensed it earlier than Xiao Hua did. They separately fled in 2 different directions as if their lives depended on it. Just as Xiao Hua and Xue Fian flew away, a lean cultivator holding a fiery red jade pendant in his left hand flew out from under the clouds with a face full of anger. That cultivator swept his eyes over him and called out, "Xue Hong!" Then, the fingers of his right hand moved. Just as he was about to form an incantation gesture, he caught sight of Xiao Hua's figure flying into the distance. He couldn't help but stare blankly. He inwardly said, "This? Could it be that he's a peak stage aura refining cultivator? But that can't be right. If he's at the peak stage of aura refining, wouldn't this rainbow epiphyllum be precisely what he wanted? Why would he leave? If he stayed, wouldn't we die without a burial ground?" It was also during this moment of hesitation that Xiao Hua gradually disappeared. When he looked in 2 other directions, Li Xiaowen and Sun Fian had also flown very far away. That cultivator flashed to the side, wanting to chase after them, but Xue Hong's face had already returned to its original deathly pale color. Traces of bright red remained on his face from the forceful use of magic power just now. Although he had already taken the opportunity to take a medicinal pill and no more blood flowed out from the wound on his waist, looking at his appearance, he was somewhat weak. Sigh, that cultivator clenched his teeth and stomped his feet a few times in the air. He flew in front of Xue Hong and grabbed him, berating. "You're so fierce. Didn't you have a summoning talisman in your hand? Wouldn't we have known if you'd sent one? Why did you have to forcefully activate the fire spirit talisman? Why did you suffer such heavy injuries? With your cultivation, you can use it to defend yourself, but if you want to attack, you'll be lucky if you don't lose half of your life. Senior apprentice brother Lin, I'm useless. I can't cultivate in the sect, and I've already become a hindrance by following my senior apprentice brothers on this trip. If I send out a message talisman as soon as we meet an enemy, it'll be a disgrace to the name of our sect, but if it's a serious matter, won't it delay senior apprentice brother from luring away the water-patterned butterfly and harvesting the rainbow cloud?" Xue Hong bit his lip and argued. "You!" Senior Marshal Brother Lin glared at Xue Hong with a look of exasperation. "You're so stubborn. If you don't change your personality, you'll still be a low-level chi refining cultivator even if you train for another 100 years. Little brother understands. Little brother will pay attention in the future." Although Xue Hong said so, he didn't look like someone who had admitted defeat for half a year. "Sigh, forget it." Senior Brother Lin pulled Xue Hong and flew down. After thinking for a moment, he stopped and pointed in the direction Li Xiaowen and the others had fled. "These people, which sect are they from?" "This? I don't know." Xue Hong thought for a moment and said with a bit of confusion. "These three people didn't wear the same Taoist robes, so I can't tell which sect they're from. However, I know their names." "What? You know them?" Senior Marshal Brother Lin stared blankly and asked in surprise. "Hee, not at all." Xue Hong told him what had happened just now. Senior Marshal Brother Lin was all smiles at first, then he blurted out. "Is there even a need to say it? These people are all loose cultivators. Only these loose cultivators who don't belong to any sects would fight like dogs biting dogs, without any order to speak of." But when he heard Xiaohua's strange actions, he was somewhat aghast. He pointed in the direction Xiaohua had flown and said, But is he flying at the same speed as a peak chi refining cultivator? I didn't see how fast that person was flying, but he was flying in that direction." Xue Hong nodded and said, "At that time, that cultivator was only watching from the side and didn't make a move. If he had made a move, let alone a peak chi refining cultivator, even a first or second layer chi refining cultivator would only need to throw an ice thorn talisman at me and I'd be dead. That's a bit strange." Senior Marshal Brother Lin muttered. Xiaohua, I've never heard of a peak chi refining loose cultivator called Xiaohua. And even if he was a loose cultivator, how could a peak chi refining cultivator like him mingle with these filthy fourth layer chi refining cultivators? Li Xiaowen. Sun Fian. Who are these people? They actually dared to attack a disciple of my Blazing Flame sect. When I return to the sect, I'll definitely report this to the sect master. We can't let this matter go," Senior Marshal Brother Lin said fiercely. "Senior Marshal Brother Lin, did you get the rainbow cloud?" Xue Hong nodded silently. Seeing that there was no longer any seven-colored brilliance in front of them, he knew that Senior Marshal Brother Lin had succeeded. "That's right. Blazing Flame sects Lin Xiaonan and Yun Fei. Oh, and Xue Hong, the three great disciples took action." "How could the rainbow cloud have flown away?" Lin Xiaonan said proudly. "It's all thanks to the two of you, Senior Marshal brothers. I was just helping out," Xue Hong said with a slightly red face. "Of course not. If it weren't for you holding back those three loose cultivators, Junior Marshal Brother Yun and I would have rushed back. I'm afraid the others would have already succeeded." Lin Xiaonan sneered. That loose cultivator who flew down alone was only at the 4th layer of chi refining. He couldn't even block Junior Marshal Brother Yun's body-shattering bone incantation, and he actually dared to dream of taking the rainbow cloud away? Just as they were talking, another figure flashed out from the clouds. It was a middle-aged man with a medium build and a yellowish complexion. It was none other than Blazing Flame Sect's other disciple, Yunfei. Yunfei held a storage pouch in one hand and a leaf-shaped yellow talisman in the other. He was smiling, but when he saw Shui Hong's injuries, he was shocked. He handed the storage pouch to Lin Xiaonan and asked, "Senior Marshal Brother Lin, what happened to Junior Marshal Brother Shui?" Lin Xiaonan took the storage pouch, opened it to take a look, and explained the situation. "This foolish brother thinks these people are loose cultivators. That cultivator called Xiaohua is someone we can't afford to offend. We'd better go back and ask the sect to make a decision." Shui Hong opened his mouth, wanting to say, "That Xiaohua, his cultivation level seems to be only at the 2nd layer of qi refining." But then he thought about the urgency of the situation and was afraid he might have been mistaken, so he didn't say anything. That's the only way." Yunfei nodded. He looked at Shui Hong and said, "Junior Marshal Brother Shui, you've done a great service this time. When we return to the sect, I'm afraid you'll be handsomely rewarded. I hope Junior Marshal Brother Shui can seize this opportunity. It's all thanks to you two senior Marshal Brothers." Shui Hong hurriedly said, clasping his hands. "I understand. Haha, it's all thanks to you." Yunfei laughed. "Looking at your injuries, you didn't tarnish the reputation of our Blazing Flame sect. The headmaster is very happy to hear that." Immediately, the 3 of them flew straight to the west. As for Xiaohua, he was as anxious as a bird startled by the twang of a bow. He was very clear in his heart that he didn't attack, but how could an expert at the 8th layer of qi refining allow him to say anything? Maybe he'd use some trick he didn't understand, and he'd lose his life on the spot. Wouldn't that be an injustice? After flying for a while, Xiaohua saw that the cultivator didn't chase after him. He slowed down and slowly flew forward. In his heart, he unexpectedly felt a faint disappointment. It was as if he really hoped that the cultivator would chase after him, so he could try and kill an 8th layer cultivator on the spot. What am I thinking? He's at the 8th layer of qi refining. His cultivation level is higher than mine by more than a level. I can't be careless. If I get cocky just because I was able to kill 2 6th layer cultivators, I'll die at the hands of others sooner or later. Xiaohua secretly warned himself. I don't know how Li Xiaowen and Sun Fian are doing. That cultivator didn't chase after me, so I'm afraid he'll chase after those 2. Those 2's flying speed is average. I'm afraid they won't be able to escape. Xiaohua was somewhat disheartened. He wanted to take out a sound-transmitting talisman and try, but when he thought about the 2's behavior just now, he really didn't want to be reduced to jackals of the same lair as them. Heavens forsaken, it's just like that. It's just a plate of loose sand, only using a cultivation method to gather loose cultivators together. Without this, just the grudges between loose cultivators within Heaven's Forsaken would be enough to destroy Heaven's Forsaken. If this problem isn't solved, Heaven's Forsaken will forever be nothing. Xiaohua saw that the mist in this cloud-light marsh was faintly discernible. Apart from the faint stench, it really did look like a fairyland. He unconsciously flew slowly and carefully pondered. Perhaps Senior Qing is using this method to eliminate the dregs of Heaven's Forsaken? What's the use of the revolving illumination pill in the end? Fan Daomao didn't explain it clearly, and I've never heard of it in Jinghua City's marketplace. Presumably, it's not an ordinary medicinal pill. Moreover, seeing that Blazing Flame Sect's disciple would rather die to protect it, I'm afraid that this revolving illumination pill is extremely important. It's comparable to the building foundation pill. I'm afraid it's also something that can increase cultivation. No, that's not right. Fan Daomao said that it's related to divine sense, it's for people at the peak of the aura refining realm. Xiaohua was frowning as he thought, when his heart suddenly tightened. He vigilantly looked to his left. That side was also filled with mist, and there was also a faint shadow flying to the side. Xiaohua was greatly alarmed. He thought that it was blazing flame Sex Lin Xiaonan chasing after him. Without thinking, he held his breath, found a place with dense mist, and plunged in. Fortunately, when he landed, he could clearly see that this was an extremely hidden area. There was an enormous boulder lying horizontally in the middle of the marsh, and Xiaohua was right on the side of that boulder. However, when Xiaohua landed on the ground, the toads that were previously squatting on the boulder were all scared away. They croaked and jumped into the swamp. This is bad. As soon as he heard this voice, Xiaohua knew that there was a problem. By the time he wanted to run, it was already too late. He heard someone shout from above him. "Who is it?" Immediately, a bright light shined from above his head. Bright light technique. Xiaohua knew from the Feng clan's book of basic spells that this was a spell used for illumination. What should I do? Although this voice was different from Lin Xiaonan's, Xiaohua couldn't see the other side's appearance. He didn't know the other side's cultivation, so he was still somewhat nervous. Oh, that's right, how could I forget this? At this critical moment, Xiaohua suddenly remembered. -5. Chapter 1377. As Xiaohua thought this, he brushed his hand and took out a yellow talisman from his space. This yellow talisman appeared very exquisite, and the runes on the talisman paper floated above it. They vaguely seemed to be alive, slowly flowing. It was the Earth Escape talisman that Xiaohua had purchased from the market. Xiaohua urged his magic power, and the runes on the talisman suddenly expanded, releasing an extremely faint yellow splendor that covered Xiaohua's entire body. Before the cultivator's illumination technique could illuminate him, the entire brilliance gradually sank into the huge rock. In the instant the Earth Escape talisman entered the huge rock, Xiaohua was dumbfounded. Xiaohua wasn't stunned by the Earth Escape talisman's function, nor was it because he saw the cultivator above him. Rather, in the instant he entered the huge rock, a kind of incomparable familiarity spread from his skin. A kind of warm and very safe feeling enveloped his entire body. It was as if this brilliance that entered the huge rock was his home, a place that he had visited countless times before. What the hell is going on? Xiaohua felt this indescribable familiarity, and was truly at a loss. So much so that his 10 fingers were pinched in front of his chest, each forming a kind of spell seal. The spell seals were very familiar and also very profound, but there wasn't any magic power being generated from the spell seals. Xiaohua had a kind of intuition that this magic power didn't seem to be something that his current cultivation could mobilize. Moreover, in his meridians, when the true qi circulated, the magic power that was generated simply followed the spell seals, somewhat inharmonious. But as for what was inappropriate, Xiaohua was at a loss. Thinking of his own unique understanding of the spell seals, Xiaohua somewhat understood. Could it be that I knew this Earth Escape technique back then? However, he soon faintly shook his head. The 5 elements escape technique was something that Foundation establishment cultivators could use. It was far from something that he, a mere second-level qi condensation cultivator, could vainly dream of. If he was a Foundation establishment cultivator back then where did his original cultivation go? His meridians were something that he had never cultivated before. If I was a Foundation establishment cultivator, how could I have fallen to Yellow Flower Ridge? Xiaohua's hands unconsciously formed hand seals, as if he was extremely familiar with them. He allowed the familiar feeling to ripple through his entire body. Suddenly, Xiaohua seemed to have been hit by a confinement talisman again. He stood there in a daze. His mouth was wide open, and his eyes were somewhat blank. It seemed he had thought of something. Outside the boulder, as soon as Xiaohua entered, a bright light illuminated the place where Xiaohua was standing. Afterwards, a short old man in extremely tattered clothes with gray-white hair and a face full of wrinkles flew over from the sky. His cultivation seemed to be around the 6th layer of qi refining. The old man's face was full of vigilance. While holding a few yellow talismans, he looked around and shouted from time to time. This old man sees you. Come out quickly! Why are you hiding? Aren't you there? Humph, still not coming out. Must you force me to get angry? However, even after talking for a long time and landing on the boulder, there was still no response. Eh? Is there really no one? The old man muttered to himself very strangely. At this moment, a slender water snake drilled out from the mud of the swamp and swam in the mud. The toads and frogs in the surroundings that had just returned to normal immediately cried out loudly. They each jumped into the water and swam away. Oh, so it's like that! The old man saw clearly and nodded slightly. The expression on his face relaxed a little. He muttered to himself. Like I said, a place like Yunshi Marsh stinks to death. Who would come here after the rain? Ah, he has also grown up. His thoughts are starting to become more meticulous. He actually chose this place. Soon after, the old man sat cross-legged on the boulder and closed his eyes to adjust his breathing. He no longer paid attention to the situation around him. Inside the boulder, Xiaohua was like a clay sculpture. After a long time, he blinked a few times and muttered, How is this possible? I'm definitely wrong. How could I have cultivated other meridians? But Sect Master said that my meridians seem to be alive. Inside them, there must be many meridians that the second layer of qi refining doesn't touch. Who knows if those meridians have been cultivated or not? Besides, the strange spell just now clearly said that the true qi in these meridians can't support it. If it wasn't for the fact that these spells don't use magic power, then there's only one explanation. This young master still has some meridians that can't be cultivated before the second layer of qi refining, no, before the middle stage of foundation establishment. Celestial clan, the body of a sage? This thought suddenly emerged in Xiaohua's mind. I am really from the Celestial clan? Xiaohua thought in his mind. The spells in his hands were still unceasingly forming. These spells were very complicated. Compared to the Feng clan's basic spells or the spells of imprisonment talismans, they were of a much higher level. However, these seemingly very profound spells were displayed in Xiaohua's hands without any sluggishness. Outside the boulder, the time it took to eat a meal quickly passed. The old man suddenly opened his eyes and looked to the east. However, the east was shrouded in clouds and mist, so he couldn't see very far. The time should be here. That child has come, right? The old man stood up from the boulder and slapped his storage pouch to take out a yellow talisman. He used magic power to slightly activate it. A beautiful fireball flew into the air, spun a few times, and exploded with a bang, dispersing a large area of the surrounding clouds and mist. Soon after, a young cultivator with a medium build flew out from the clouds and mist. As he flew, he vigilantly looked all around. This young cultivator's appearance was extremely fair. His age was about the same as Xiaohua's, and he looked to be about 17 or 18 years old. He wasn't a bystander. He was the same person Xiaohua met at Jingbo City's E.G. He. When the old man saw he flying over, a gratified smile appeared on his face. He flew in the air and called out, Uncle Xiang. When he saw the old man, he quickly flew over with a smile on his face. This smile was completely different from the one he had at E.G. This smile was filled with sincerity and attachment. When the two landed on the boulder, he bowed and said, This little one isn't talented. I haven't seen Uncle Xiang in many years. This little one greets Uncle Xiang. When the old man saw this, his face was filled with gratification and panic. He quickly helped He up and said, Young master, aren't you trying to kill this old servant by kowtowing like this? If the old master sees this, he will scold this old servant. Uncle Xiang. He forced himself to kowtow. The old man couldn't stop him and could only let him kowtow while the old man moved to the side. Young master. The old man waited for Gong He to finish kowtowing before helping him up. Before he could say anything, Gong He said, Uncle Xiang, my Fu family has long been destroyed. There is no young master here. Uncle Xiang, just call me A He. Oh. These past few years, this old servant didn't dare to visit you in order to avoid being seen by others. I wonder if you have been well? The old man's eyes stared straight into Ahi's eyes. His own eyes were already filled with tears. It was unknown whether it was joy or sadness. Uncle Xiang, I'll let you know. Ever since I left Uncle Xiang, I went to visit the Chou family. Sigh, the Chou family's business is flourishing. It feels like the sun in the sky. I didn't see any opportunities, so I left first. I cultivated while doing some trading at the Jingpa City's exchange market. Ahi, looking at your cultivation, I'm sure you've suffered a lot these past few years. If the old master in heaven knew about this, he would be at ease. The old man sighed and said, But the Chou family's power is too great. It's not something you can fight against alone. If you can't, you'd better cultivate harder and think about revenge in the future. Uncle Xiang, this little one is unwilling, Ahi said hatefully. My Fu family was famous for making talismans in the country of Xi. What kind of talisman can't we make? Even if it was just a few spirit talismans, it wouldn't be a problem. However, our entire foundation was snatched away just like that. The 14 direct descendants of our Fu clan, other than this kid, have all been eliminated. Do you think this kid can wait until the future? Luckily, Uncle Xiang took me away that year and brought along some of my father's unimportant cultivation methods and refining methods. Otherwise, even if I wanted to take revenge, I'm afraid I wouldn't be able to do so. So, while I was cultivating, I thought that it's impossible to rely on myself outside. If I want to take revenge earlier, I have to enter the Chou family's circle and start from the inside, destroy it bit by bit. In the worst case, I can kill the Chou family. Don't, young master. The old man was anxious. This is a dangerous matter. Let me think about it. Yes, Uncle Xiang. I asked Uncle Xiang to come out because I want to have a good talk with Uncle Xiang. I want Uncle Xiang to give me an idea. On the huge rock, Xiaohua and the old man looked at each other and talked. Inside the huge rock, Xiaohua had another change. His mind was not distracted. His hands were fluently casting the spell. After thinking for a long time, he suddenly felt his whole body gradually moving up. Oh no, this is bad. Xiaohua suddenly realized that this so-called Earth Escape talisman had a time limit. He had stayed in this huge rock for a long time. He was afraid that the talisman had started to lose its effect. Xiaohua clapped his hands and was about to cast another Earth Escape talisman. But just as he picked up the talisman, he frowned slightly. He had been inside the huge rock all this time. He didn't know if the person on the huge rock had left. If he didn't leave, wouldn't the light from casting the Earth Escape talisman attract his attention? After thinking for a while, Xiaohua still put the talisman into his space. Then, he twisted his body with all his might and turned to the other side of the huge rock. When Xiaohua reached the other side of the huge rock, his body was completely squeezed out by the huge rock. Fortunately, Xiaohua's figure flashed on top of the boulder without making any sound. The thick white fog completely covered his figure as he lay on the boulder. This person's voice is so familiar. Xiaohua very naturally heard the old man's words. Uncle Xiang, please pay more attention and see if there are any movements from the Chou family. If there are any opportunities, please inform me. I will wait for an opportunity to sneak in. Even if I can't kill the Chou family with my own hands, taking out my Fu family's ancestral talisman is also a good thing. -5. Chapter 1378. Match? Xiaohua stared blankly for a moment before immediately distinguishing between the two. He wondered inwardly. When I was in Yi City, I couldn't find him anywhere. So he ran here. Heh, didn't this guy say he has a master? How come he has an enemy now? Does he want to sneak into the enemy's sect? When Xiaohua's Earth Escape talisman lost its effect and was forced out, Uncle Xiang had already talked for a long time. He only heard the end of the conversation, but Uncle Xiang replied, What? Young master wants to sneak into the enemy's sect? How can this be? Young Master's cultivation level? Uncle Xiang asked in surprise. How? Young Master's cultivation level, how can it change? Uncle Xiang, I'm untalented, but I coincidentally obtained a cultivation technique in Jinghua City. It can conceal one's cultivation level. Although I can't comprehend 50% of this cultivation technique with my aptitude, I can change my cultivation level to the first layer of the aura refining realm, or even the second layer, and so on. I can definitely fool the enemy's attention. Oh, so it's like that. Uncle Xiang nodded, gratified. That's good. Otherwise, with young Master's current cultivation level, how could he sneak in? Then, Uncle Xiang changed the topic. Young Master, revenge is important, but young Master also has to consider Master's descendants. In fact, in this old servant's opinion, this is the most important thing. Oh, right, these past few years, this old servant has been thinking about young Master's dual cultivation. This old servant thinks if it's possible, young Master might as well. Xiaohua was eavesdropping in the distance. He couldn't see Uncle Xiang's expression, but in the white fog, Uncle Xiang's expression was exceptionally wonderful. It was a kind of annoyed but didn't dare to disobey, but if he did, he would feel extremely uncomfortable. Uncle Xiang had just nagged for a while when Uncle Xiang nervously looked around and whispered, Uncle Xiang, although this place is hidden, there are many cultivators picking spiritual herbs after the rain. This kid has a blood feud and wants to hide my identity to seek revenge. Uncle Xiang used to be a famous figure in the cultivation world of our country of Xi. If someone saw this kid with Uncle Xiang, I'm afraid it would be inappropriate. Uncle Xiang was happy to hear this. He nodded and said, That year, before this old servant joined the Fu family, I also killed several. Alas, why bring that up? By the way, there's a female cultivator on Qinyi Mountain. Listen, Uncle Xiang, is there someone behind the boulder? Songming suddenly pointed at Xiaohua's location. Oh no, how did this guy discover me? Xiaohua broke out in a cold sweat. He patted his storage pouch and took out several yellow talismans. He wanted to stand up. Unexpectedly, Uncle Xiang was shocked at first. He turned his head and scolded. Where did this little thief come from? But then, he shouted again. Young Master, young Master! You! Why are you flying so fast? This old monk has yet to tell you the details of the female cultivators. As he spoke, Uncle Xiang's voice became softer and softer. He must have flown off to catch up with them. After a long while, Xiaohua walked out from behind the boulder with a strange expression on his face. He stood there, not knowing whether to laugh or cry as he looked in the direction the two people flew off in. It was unknown what he was thinking. Then, Xiaohua stamped his feet, looked at the surrounding boulders, and sent out another Earth Escape talisman. His whole body went in and out of the boulders several times. Only after he had satisfied his craving for Earth Escape did he finally fly up. However, while Xiaohua was flying in the air, he forgot his plan. He inwardly said, Songming admittedly has a blood feud, but he always has a target for revenge and a cultivation technique to cultivate. But what about me? 100 Herbs Gate is such a big power. If one doesn't have a cultivation base in the late stage of the Foundation Establishment realm, or even at the Golden Core realm, it's basically impossible for me to take revenge. But what about my cultivation technique? Alas, there's no reason for this. I'd better see if Li Xiaowen and Sun Fian are dead or alive. Xiaohua finally understood. I have my own principles. My goal is the same as theirs. As for other things, I can't wallow in the mire with them. Thinking about this, Xiaohua opened his storage pouch and prepared to take out the consecutive note talisman. However, just as he opened his storage pouch, a light blue brilliance flashed in his storage pouch. Huh! Xiaohua almost cried out in surprise. However, he immediately understood. He reached out his hand and took out a silk pouch from his storage pouch. The moment the silk pouch was exposed, it immediately spun rapidly like a fist-sized spinning top. As the spinning ball of light spun, countless amounts of spiritual energy were used. Moreover, specks of light floated out from the ball of light. After the time it took to brew a cup of tea, the ball of light gradually stopped spinning. Then, Qing Fengmin's voice sounded. Fellow Taoists, it's been hard on you. I hope you can continue to work hard. The next place is Fire Fusion Valley. Fire Fusion Valley? When Xiaohua heard this, he frowned again. The doubt in his heart, or rather, he was even more puzzled. Southern Rainbow Plain, Yulian Mountain, Cloud Shi Marsh, and Fire Fusion Valley. Each of them was a dangerous place. Moreover, the spiritual energy in each place was different. This silk, could it be that it was tailored according to the spiritual energy in each place? Forget it, forget it. Since I have to lower myself to ask for a cultivation technique, I can only listen to his arrangements. Xiaohua casually placed the silk pouch that had lost its brilliance into his storage pouch. He took out the consecutive note talisman and thought to himself, I hope the two of them are still alive to hear this news. However, just as Xiaohua was about to release the consecutive note talisman, he suddenly saw a strange brilliance under his feet. That brilliance was very dazzling. It was very special in the light white fog. Seeing this brilliance, Xiaohua was overjoyed. He put away the consecutive note talisman and took out several yellow talismans. He slowly flew towards the brilliance. As he flew closer, Xiaohua could clearly see that at the bottom of the fog, in the viscous swamp, there was a faint seven-colored ring floating in the air. Below the ring was a spherical object about the size of a duck's egg. Its surface was bumpy and bumpy. At the bottom of the sphere was a palm-sized black leaf growing in the swamp. The rainbow cloud? Xiaohua had never seen this thing before. This seven-colored ring was much smaller than the one he had seen before. Its luster was also much dimmer. Therefore, he couldn't be sure that this was the rainbow cloud. Most importantly, Xiaohua had always thought of the rainbow cloud as a gorgeous flower. However, when he saw this ugly spherical object, it was far from what he had imagined. Xiaohua stopped about 3 meters away from the rainbow epiphyllum and carefully observed it from both sides. The two 8th layer Qi refining senior brothers of the Fire Flame School had gone to look after the spirit object. Presumably, the spirit object's strength wouldn't be too weak. After looking for a moment, Xiaohua didn't discover anything. He couldn't help but feel bewildered. Scratching his head, Xiaohua hesitated. Should he pick it or not? After standing there for the time it took to make a cup of tea, Xiaohua still couldn't resist this great temptation. He first placed some yellow talismans on his body. Then, he lowered himself and prepared to pick it. However, just as Xiaohua was about to release a spell, he suddenly felt as if he was being watched. Xiaohua immediately stopped his hand. Then, he did his utmost to look all around. Under his extremely careful observation, Xiaohua followed the direction of his senses and found a clue. That anomaly actually came from the leaf below the rainbow cloud. The leaf was black. Although it was the same as an ordinary leaf, it was still a little thinner. At the edge of the leaf, there were actually 2 thin antennae. On top of the antennae, there were also 2 small balls. What made Xiaohua vigilant were these 2 balls. Xiaohua was able to discern it clearly. He couldn't help but sweat a bit on his forehead. This spiritual object, its disguise is really ingenious. If anyone couldn't see through the rainbow epiphyllum's technique, they would definitely be attacked by it if they weren't careful. What kind of spiritual object is this? Xiaohua hurriedly flew back a bit. His eyes were fixed on the spiritual object as he tried to guess. Unfortunately, with his limited experience as a cultivator, how could he possibly know? How should I deal with this thing? Xiaohua pinched his chin and frowned in thought. This time, it was very quick. In just a few flicks of his fingers, Xiaohua took out a confinement talisman. Urging his magic power, he released it towards the spiritual object. That spiritual object was very sharp. When the confinement talisman was still a few feet away, the leaf-like object suddenly withdrew. Soon after, it suddenly spread out. A butterfly separated from the rainbow cloud's leaf stem. Those 2 pitch-black wings were each the size of a palm. There were some water ripples on them. Moreover, those water ripples seemed to have the shape of some talismans. As the wings flapped, spiritual energy overflowed everywhere. The water-patterned butterfly flapped its pitch-black wings. As the talismans on the wings flashed, the weak spiritual energy around the wings was stirred up. After this spiritual energy was formed, it actually had a kind of suction force, sucking in the surrounding spiritual energy. In the blink of an eye, it formed a pillar. Once the pillar of spiritual energy was formed, it spun and flew towards Xiaohua. This is a water-patterned butterfly. Seeing the rod formed by spiritual energy attack, Xiaohua was somewhat dumbstruck. He knew that there were water-patterned butterflies in Yinshi Marsh. Moreover, after seeing it, he also understood that this was a water-patterned butterfly. However, he never expected that the water-patterned butterfly's attack method was actually this kind of spiritual energy rod. Just as he was somewhat hesitating, the spiritual energy rod had already flown before his eyes. In this short moment, the spiritual energy rod became even thicker. The momentum of its flight was directly like a second or third layer chi refining cultivator urging his magic power to attack with all his strength. Xiaohua felt the stirring cold wind and hurriedly urged the flight talisman. His figure flew up gracefully, and with a turn, he leapt into the air. The spiritual energy rod missed and smashed into a huge rock. The spiritual energy rod's strength was limited, but the force of its attack was quite large. With a zungzing sound, it actually carved a deep groove into the huge rock. Is there a mistake? Xiaohua's gaze swept over, and he became even more shocked. If the force of its flight brushed against a cultivator's body, no matter how sturdy their defenses were, they would probably be broken. Immediately afterward, the water-patterned butterfly flapped its wings and chased after him again. Looking at its flying speed, it was almost as fast as a fifth or sixth layer chi refining cultivator. -5. Chapter 1379. Xiaohua saw the water-patterned butterfly flapping its wings and chasing after him. Its speed was actually comparable to a sixth-stage chi refining cultivator. The corner of his mouth unconsciously revealed a trace of a smile. He flew sideways into the sky, controlling his speed to a certain degree. He was just able to fly faster than the water-patterned butterfly, but not by much. Little by little, he lured the water-patterned butterfly into the swamp next to the huge rock. The water-patterned butterfly, seeing that it couldn't catch up, unconsciously flapped its wings repeatedly. The brilliance of the talisman scripts on its wings flapped, and one after another, spinning spirit chi rods flew out one after another. Not only did they smash into the mountain rocks, but they also stirred up the mist in the swamp. This was different from the strong winds that Xiaohua usually saw. Not only did these rod-shaped spirit chi rods not disperse the mist, but because of the mist, Xiaohua's vision became even worse. After the last spirit chi rod was released, the talisman scripts on the water-patterned butterfly's body became somewhat dim. It seemed that its vitality had been damaged, and it didn't have the strength to release any more spirit chi rods. Moreover, the water-patterned butterfly flapped its wings and actually wanted to turn around and return. Huh! Xiaohua was very surprised. Isn't this water-patterned butterfly a bit too intelligent? It wasn't easy for him to lure the water-patterned butterfly away. How could he let it turn around? Immediately, Xiaohua didn't hold back. He flipped his wrist, and several fireball talismans that he had long since stored up power shot out. They surrounded the water-patterned butterfly and began to explode with a rumbling sound. At the same time, Xiaohua didn't hesitate. He urged his magic power and flew with all his strength to the place where the rainbow cloud was. When he got close, he immediately used a spell and extracted the entire rainbow cloud from the swamp. With a wave of his hand, he sent it into the space behind his head. Soon after, Xiaohua controlled the puppet inside the space and began to slowly dig a hole in a corner of the space, preparing to plant the rainbow cloud inside. Just as Xiaohua sent the rainbow cloud into the space, the water-patterned butterfly escaped from several exploding fireballs in an extremely sorry state. Its pitch-black wings had a faint flame aura and some black smoke. There were even some cracks on its wings. However, At the same time that the rainbow cloud disappeared, the water-patterned butterfly seemed to feel something. Its originally somewhat trembling wings suddenly flapped, and the water-patterned butterfly chased after Xiao Hua with extreme speed. Xiao Hua naturally paid close attention to the movements of the water-patterned butterfly. When he saw the water-patterned butterfly fly out of the group of fireballs and even fly faster than before, he immediately laughed and said, "You should obediently stay in Yinshi Marsh. This young master won't play with you anymore." Then, he flew high into the sky and flew into the distance. What shocked Xiao Hua was that the water-patterned butterfly was even crazier than before. It flapped its wings and did its utmost to strike out the spirit chi staff while chasing relentlessly. Fortunately, Xiao Hua flew much faster than the water-patterned butterfly. After a few twists and turns, he made several detours and got rid of the water-patterned butterfly. After flying far away, Xiao Hua very strangely looked at the clouds and mist behind him that were stirred up by countless spirit chi staffs of various sizes and muttered to himself, "Isn't it just picking the rainbow cloud? You didn't plant it, so why are you chasing this young master like it's something that belongs to your family?" After that, Xiao Hua took some time to wait for the puppet to finish digging a big hole. He then took some water and mud from the swamp and placed the rainbow epiphyllum inside. It seemed like Xiao Hua wanted to try out how to plant the rainbow epiphyllum. However, what Xiao Hua didn't expect was that at the stem of the rainbow cloud, there were 2 rice grain-sized eggs stuck to it. When Xiao Hua put the rainbow cloud into the space, they also came in. After planting the rainbow cloud, Xiao Hua flew for a while before taking out the consecutive notes talisman. He urged it with his magic power, and the consecutive notes talisman actually whistled and flew in a direction. "Hee, I don't know which fellow Taoist is still alive. It's most likely Li Xiaowen," Xiao Hua thought and sped up to chase. The consecutive notes talisman flew out of Yinshi Marsh. When Xiao Hua flew to a slightly deviated cliff, Li Xiaowen and Sun Fian hurriedly greeted him. Sun Fian smiled and said, "I already said that fellow Taoist Zhao's magic power is profound and his flying speed is fast. How could he be captured by the disciples of the Fire Flame sect? If fellow Taoist Li made a bet with I, wouldn't the result immediately be clear?" Xiao Hua originally wanted to face Sun Fian's condemnation, but when he saw Sun Fian's attitude, he was stunned at first. Then, he cupped his hands and said, "Fellow Taoist Sun is too kind. How can I's cultivation be compared to the 2 seniors? The difference is too great." Li Xiaowen also had a harmonious expression, as if the scene in Yinshi Marsh had never happened. He smiled and said, "Fellow Taoist Xiao is too modest. When we were in the 2nd layer of the Qi refining realm, how could we have fellow Taoist Zhao's magical power? I'm afraid that when fellow Taoist Xiao cultivates to the 4th layer of the Qi refining realm, we won't be fellow Taoist Zhao's opponent." Hearing this, Sun Fian's expression changed slightly, but it was immediately covered by a smile. Xiao Hua saw that the 2 people didn't mention a word about what happened before, and he understood in his heart. His eyes turned, and he said with a smile, "I just practiced a rare kind of cultivation method, which is why I can fly slightly faster. But if this is known by others, I won't have any advantage to speak of. It's not as good as the 2 fellow Taoists who have profound magic power, so I'm not afraid of being known by others." When Li Xiaowen and Sun Fian heard this, they both had a look of understanding and nodded. This is fellow Taoist Zhao's unique magical power. The 2 of us can guarantee that if fellow Taoist Xiao doesn't reveal it, others definitely won't know." Xiao Hua cupped his hands. "Many thanks for the 2 fellow Taoists' magnanimity." Li Xiaowen glanced at Sun Fian, then turned to Xiao Hua and said, "Fellow Taoist Xiao, our silk bags haven't changed. I wonder if fellow Taoist Xiao, the silk bag I obtained from Yongshang has changed." Xiao Hua said as he took out the silk bag that had already turned into an ordinary one. "Haha, that's great." Li Xiaowen and Sun Fian both clapped and laughed, asking, "Where is the next place?" "Fire Thaw Valley," Xiao Hua said without hesitation. "Fire Thaw Valley?" When Li Xiaowen and Sun Fian heard this, they didn't frown or be shocked like Xiao Hua thought. They just understood like before. Could it be the two fellow Taoists already know? Xiao Hua asked curiously. To be honest with fellow Taoist Xiao, just now when we fled here first, we already discussed it, Li Xiaowen said with a smile. I and Sun Fian received fellow Taoist Zhao's reminder. Thinking about Nan Kaiping, Yu Lianshan, and Yinxi Lake, according to their characteristics, we felt that this Fire Thaw Valley was also within fellow Taoist Zhao's arrangements. Oh? Xiao Hua understood. So, if fellow Taoist Xiao can't come out in time, the two of us might have to go to Fire Thaw Valley to try our luck after waiting for a day, Sun Fian said. Of course, this is only a backup plan. Since fellow Taoist Xiao has come out, the three of us have already gathered, and the remaining 3 silk bags are all intact. Naturally, this is the best. Are we going to Fire Thaw Valley now? Xiao Hua nodded and asked. Li Xiaowen shook his head. We can't go today. We offended the Fire Flame sect, and we don't know if they have an ambush outside. Yinxi Lake is admittedly big, but if they want to, I'm afraid they'll look for us outside. Why don't we create a diversion and rest here for a day? It won't be too late to go out after they've chased us far away. Hearing this, Xiao Hua nodded repeatedly. This was the trick he used to trick the 100 Herbs sect when he came out of Yellow Flower Ridge. There are hidden caves in this mountain. Let's go in first. We'll leave tomorrow morning. Sun Fian flew first, and each of them found a cave at the foot of the mountain to adjust their breathing and rest. Xiao Hua sat alone in the cave, thinking about Li Xiaowen and Sun Fian's attitude just now. He couldn't help but sneer. He was very clear that it was because he revealed some divine abilities that surpassed ordinary cultivators that made the two of them treat him as an equal. Moreover, because of the common goal of treasure hunting, the three of them were temporarily in a kind of balance. No one could say for sure what would happen after the treasure hunt. As for whether Li Xiaowen and Sun Fian would suddenly attack him and take away the silk bags, Xiao Hua wasn't too worried. After all, he was good at flying. If the two of them didn't have full confidence, they definitely wouldn't attack him. Besides, the two of them were still suspicious of each other. Who would take the risk to offend a cultivator who could fly faster than them? As for whether or not the two of them would leak out the fact that he could fly faster, Xiao Hua was even less afraid. Wait until this young master's cultivation catches up to yours. Would I still be afraid of you talking nonsense? As Xiao Hua thought, he took another marrow-cleansing pill and calmly refined the medicinal efficacy. Moreover, he immersed his mind into the space, comprehending the Tao of heaven and delving into the towering realm. In the next few days, the three of them seemed to have the help of God, and their progress was very smooth. In the Fire Melt Valley, beside a large expanse of boiling magma, Sun Fian's silk bag was opened by the rich and hot fire spiritual energy, and they found the next location, Hurricane Canyon. The three of them hurriedly rushed to Hurricane Canyon, braving the hurricane that could easily blow away the protective yellow talismans. Under the circumstances of the three people's confinement talismans, Vajra talismans, and other protective yellow talismans, they finally opened Li Xiaowen's silk bag inside the hurricane. The hurricane that could disperse the yellow talismans actually couldn't take away the weightless silk bag, and Qing Fengmin's voice also didn't disperse inside the hurricane. Fellow Taoists, congratulations, congratulations. The next test is the last one. I'm sure that fellow Taoists already have some complaints in their hearts. However, I still have to tell fellow Taoists that this time there is indeed a complete set of cultivation methods, and there are also magic tools, medicinal pills, and so on. However, I, Tian Qi, have a lot of fellow Taoists, and I also want to give this opportunity to everyone fairly, so I have no choice but to set this test. I hope that fellow Taoists who can reach the end can understand my painstaking efforts. This Qing Fengmin's words were long-winded, causing the three of them to only curse in their hearts. While bitterly holding on to the yellow talismans that were about to be blown away by the hurricane, they pricked up their ears to listen. When Qing Fengmin said the three words, Thunderclap Cave, the three of them no longer paid any attention to the silk bag, and all of them hurriedly flew out of Hurricane Canyon. However, after leaving Hurricane Canyon and arriving at a safe place, Li Xiaowen and Sun Fian's complexions didn't look good. 5. You're tuning into the Phoenix Knights YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.